morning. Welcome to the King's Report for March 31st, 2018, the 9th year of Cheongi, the second month and the 15th day by the heavenly calendar. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyung Moon. Let's start this morning with our weather in the Cheongguk Palace area. It's 33 degrees right now with some clouds, and it's going to go down to perhaps about 30 degrees before we see the sunrise in a little while. But today it'll be going up to 57 degrees, mostly sunny. So it'll be a nice spring day. However, on Monday, that'll be April. That'll be April 2nd. On Monday in April, we're going to have snow. That's the forecast anyway. 1 to 2 inches of snow at the Cheongguk Palace area, with a 21% chance that it may be more than 2 inches. So that's how April is going to start out. It's going to be still rather chilly during the evening hours. And during the nighttime, it's still going to be getting down close to freezing or even below that during the nighttime. All right, let's go to the news for the day. And as we were closing out the King's Report yesterday, there were the initial reports of casualties along the Gaza-Israel border. Gaza is an enclave along the Mediterranean Sea between Israel and Egypt, and Israel has a defensive fence set up there because Gaza is controlled by Hamas, which is designated by the U.S. State Department as a foreign terrorist organization. And they have committed many acts of terror. And Hamas called on the people of Gaza to demonstrate along the fence on the Palestinian side of the Gaza side of the fence, calling for basically return. It's called the March for Return. Return means returning to the lands that the Palestinians occupied or were living in prior to the establishment of Israel in 1948. And so this was meant to be a march towards that return to their pre-1948 territory. Well, most of the people who demonstrated, 17,000 people showed up on the first day of these demonstrations, which are supposed to be a series of demonstrations going for the next 6 weeks, leading up to the day after the Independence Day for Israel. 17,000 people showed up for the first day, and most of the people stayed well away from the fence, but some people did get close to the fence, and there were a number of incidents. And as a result, the Israeli forces, the Israel Defense Force, IDF, shot and killed 16 people. 750 people were injured in the situation. And it's Drudge here is headlining it as the Passover uprising, because Passover started on Friday night, last night. And this is the Passover weekend for people of the Jewish faith. Here, we'll get to that in a minute. Let's see what other news is here. Weekend out-of-control space station, fiery crash to Earth, where Michigan activates emergency operations. So that Chinese space station is expected to crash to Earth sometime tomorrow, somewhere in the world. It's difficult to predict. In fact, no one really knows exactly where it's going to crash, but it's possible that it will crash in Michigan. Actually, even Pennsylvania is theoretically, in the potential path of that crash. We'll have to wait and see where that falls. Hope everybody can be safe. And after the ugly memo, Facebook fears what leaks are next. This is the ugly memo, refers to the memo by one of the executives of Facebook, pointing out that their mantra is to connect people, and they are amoral or neutral as to who they are connecting. In other words, they don't care if they are connecting to terrorists or to holy people. And if they connect to terrorists, then what that means is that those two terrorists could use Facebook as a platform for planning a terrorist attack. But Facebook, this executive was actually expressing concern about this, that this could mean that Facebook would be used for evil. So after that memo was released, Facebook fears what could be next. So there is that memo has caused some backlash against Facebook, and more people are leaving Facebook, not only as a result of that, but other things as well. As Facebook, of course, has been shown to be gathering information on all of its users and selling that information. Google staff organized to fight cyberbullying at Google. Spielberg, Ready Player One, headed for $50 million open. That's a movie that Spielberg has brought about. Berlusconi biopic tipped for Cannes. Roseanne revival stirs debate among comedians. Yes, because Roseanne is a conservative. This was a conservative program, and it was very popular. A lot of people saw it, and Hollywood is sort of soul-searching. They didn't realize that Americans were quite so capable of thinking on their own without having to read the scripts that were given to them from Hollywood. Well, surprise, surprise for Hollywood. Army molds tougher basic training for out-of-shape, undisciplined recruits. Mueller nabs a professor at Boston Airport. Dershowitz warns criminalization of political differences very dangerous. Blasts the probe. A prominent Houston pastor indicted on charges of defrauding investors. Yes, this prominent pastor, we can get into that later, but he was selling bonds that were apparently, according to the government, were worth nothing, but we'll look into that in a bit. More STDs becoming drug-resistant. Yes. What is next up for a chop at White House? People keep leaving the White House. David Hogg goes after McCain. And a 13-year-old candidate runs for governor on tightening gun laws. And teacher unrest spreading. Schwarzenegger undergoes emergency heart surgery, but he's back. He says, I am back. Weekend Sister Jean puts faith focus on Final Four. This is the NCAA tournament, basketball tournament. Worship, work, and win, she says. And she's turning into the face of the tournament. A border battle, illegal convicted of killing deputies smirks as he receives the death sentence. There is real evil in the world. This person personifies that. ICE ends automatic release for pregnant women. Visa seekers will have to disclose social media. And the wall goal shrinks to just 1,000 miles. I think that's quite a bit less than half of the border with Mexico. Chicago mayoral candidates make pact to oust the Godfather. Godfather referring to Rahm Emanuel, the current Chicago mayor. Teen mob randomly beats man to death on New Jersey street. Yes, again, evil in the world. Trans shot dead in motel is 7th killed in U.S. this year. Pelosi retirement could be Republican nightmare. Could enemies sabotage undersea cables linking the world? That's right. We don't really realize that a lot of there are two ways that telephone calls and internet cross the oceans. One is by satellite, go up there like that, and the other is by undersea cables. There are undersea cables, and yes, those cables, if they were cut by an enemy force, it would disrupt communications quite a bit. It's worst time in history to be a clown. Chappaquiddick, powerful people pressured studio not to release it. Judge sorry for stealing neighbor's underwear. Let's hold our judges to a higher standard. Thousands of Palestinians swarm Gaza border in Hamas-led protests, a clash with Israeli troops. This is the beginning of return to all of Palestine. Report Israeli stealth fighters fly over Iran. DC leak culture. meets Wall Street's insider trading cops. Had to happen sometime, yep. Monkey surprised scientists by sharing even more when no one looking. Rare Picasso self-portrait expected to fetch $70 million. Branson buys Hard Rock Casino in Vegas. CVS accused of revealing HIV status of 6,000 people. Producer gunned down outside recording studio, may have been killed by music rivals, FBI say. Doctors in violent Venezuela work under threat of death if patients die. Woman accused of attacking autistic son with a saw. This situation in Israel, let's see what the most recent news is on that. Trying to bring that up right now. Siege in Gaza says 12 killed here, but the headline was 16. Let's try to get that more recent information. The Daily Mail says 12. That's the problem with newspapers, that sometimes they are outdated. What is it? It's Saturday around, what, 10 a.m. in London? They should do better. Daily Mail should be doing better. They should be keeping their headlines up to date, but they're not. Let's go to the Jerusalem Post, what they say. 17 dead in the Jerusalem Post, over 1,000 injured. So they're actually ahead of Drudge. After Palestinians clash with IDF on Gaza border, IDF being the Israel Defense Force. 20,000, it says, attended, 20,000 men, women, and children attended Friday's Land Day protests. Land Day is a day marked by Palestinians in the Middle East. High alert on Gaza border after a string of incursions. Editors note the Gaza protests don't need to end like 2010 flotilla. Let me try to get this down here. Try to get the page to move up. All right. This is always frustrating when the pages refuse to do what you want. They're trying to keep trying to get some more ads up, and my ad blocker is blocking the ads, and so they're fighting and trying to override the ad blocker, and the ad blocker won't allow it, and so there's a war going on my computer screen. All right, let's take a break right now. We'll come back with more news from a Chunuk perspective after I can get my screen to move. All right, see you in a minute.
Boy, wasn't that fun shooting this Tommy gun today?
It's always fun shooting Tommy guns. This one especially. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
all polished and chromed up. It really looks like $1 million.
Yeah, yeah. Elliot Ness would have loved one of those.
Yeah, and it's available right now in your favorite dealer, and you go pick one up.
Yeah, just have him call your distributor.
I mean, the gun, you know, was initially made way back when, back in the 27 is this one.
Yeah, model 27.
I was surprised by how quick it knocked down those plates.
Oh, 3.5 second run, under 3.5 second run, knocking down a plate right. 341.
I mean, the gun is heavy. It's about what, 12, 14 pounds, especially with this drum. But it's surprising how quick you can go with it. It would actually make quite a good self-defense rifle at home.
If I climbed in somebody's window and they were aiming that at me, I think I'd get out of there real quick. So
that sounds about right to me.
Just the intimidation factor alone.
Fire!
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, March 31st, 2018, and we're trying to get an understanding of what is going on along the Gaza-Israeli border. Here on the Jerusalem Post live blog, we see Abbas being Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, saying, "We will demand protection from the UN and the Security Council." PA leader Mahmoud Abbas said on Friday that Israel is responsible for the deaths of Gazan protesters. And the marches today prove that Palestinian people will not aid any plan that wishes to close the lid on the Palestinian issue. He said Jerusalem will remain Arab, said Abbas. The U.S. decision to recognize Jerusalem as the Israeli capital angered many in the Arab and Muslim world, leading some Palestinians to argue that the U.S. may no longer be a suitable peace negotiator between Israel and Palestinians. Hamas spokesman claims 16 dead after riots. And also, I went to Twitter and did a search using the keyword Gaza, and there are a lot of information. Most of it is anti-Israel. RT, that's the Russian government supporting or government-sponsored news media organization. Palestinians launched massive Great Return protest on Gaza border, and they made a hashtag Great Return. The photos and videos. Thousands of Palestinians are gathering along the border of the Gaza Strip and Israel for a massive 6-week-long protest calling for the right of return for Palestinian refugees. Return meaning going back to their places where they lived prior to 1948. And the UN Gaza statement, UN, of course, being very anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian. 15 Palestinians killed. This is as of 2200 today, it says. It's about 9 hours ago. So this was also yesterday. 1,416 injured by Israeli forces, 750 hit by live ammunition, 20 in critical condition, medical facilities in besieged Gaza struggling to cope. We have, of course, many results coming in on Twitter. It's an ongoing thing there. All right, but it doesn't seem to be, it's a 6-week-long protest, but it doesn't seem to be happening today. I don't see any news coming out that is any more recent than yesterday. And already it's about about 6 hours ahead of us, I think. So it's already 11, getting close to noon there now. But I don't see any updates are coming out for today. So perhaps this is a once-a-week thing. Okay, let's go to some of the other news. Let's go to this pastor who was convicted of. Or is being charged, being charged by the government of selling fake bonds. He's indicted, prominent Houston pastor indicted on charges of defrauding investors. Always we need to be careful of what your spiritual leaders or religious leaders are saying, because they can also be, well, they're also human. They also sin, and so it's important to have a direct relationship with Christ and not to have a relationship that goes through your pastor. Out of Houston, Reuters, a prominent Houston megachurch pastor who counseled presidents and top executives, was charged on Friday with selling investors more than $1 million in worthless Chinese bonds and using proceeds for his own benefit, federal authorities said. Kirby Caldwell, 64, senior pastor at the Windsor Village United Methodist Church in Houston, one of the nation's largest Protestant churches with about 17,000 members, faces wire fraud and money laundering charges in connection with the sale of historical bonds to mostly elderly investors. The bonds were issued by the former Republic of China before 1949, when the communists won that country's civil war and took power, are not recognized by the current Chinese government and have no investment value, said U.S. Attorney Alexander C. Van Hook in Shreveport, Louisiana. Caldwell's attorney said his client was unaware the bonds were worthless and had invested his own money. He's 100% absolutely not guilty of these charges, Caldwell attorney Dan Cogdell said in a broadcast interview. He was the biggest investor in these bonds. He completely believed these bonds were legitimate. Caldwell has been an advisor to former presidents, including George W. Bush, is a limited partner in the Houston Texans professional football team, and serves on the board of NRG Energy. Caldwell and Gregory Allen Smith, 55, operator and manager of Smith Financial Group in Shreveport, were charged by a federal grand jury in a 13-count indictment. Prosecutors said an arraignment date has not been set for either man, a spokesman for the U.S. Attorney's Office said. Smith, who worked as a financial planner, had been barred from the broker-dealer business since 2010 by the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission said. Calls to Windsor Village United Methodist Church were not answered on Friday, and Smith could not be reached at his office. Caldwell has led the church since 1982, according to its website. The two men face separate charges of defrauding investors by the SEC in connection with the bond sales. The regulatory agency described the bonds as collectible memorabilia. Caldwell and Smith in 2013-2014 raised at least $3.4 million from 29 mostly elderly investors by promising them high returns and used about $1.8 million of the proceeds for personal expenses, the SEC alleged. Caldwell took advantage of his victims, encouraging them to remain faithful even as he and his Smith broke that faith, stealing from elderly investors in an outright fraud, said Eric Bastillo, director of the SEC's Miami regional office. I think religions religious groups attract fraudulent offers and fraudsters, quite frankly. In my experience in the Unification Church, there were actually something quite similar to this I was aware of, and it did not come to this point. Some people approached a leader in the Unification Church with what he alleged were bonds that had been issued. Who was it? Either the Japanese government or the U.S. government. I've forgotten. This is all a lie, understand. But anyway, the idea was that, okay, after World War II, after World War II, when Japan was defeated, the money of a lot of rich Japanese had been confiscated, I guess, by the U.S. government, and these were confiscated, but bonds had been issued in return for this confiscated money, and anyway, the person brought what was alleged to be these, actually worthless pieces of paper, but alleged to be these bonds, to this senior Unification Church leader and said, oh yeah, now these wealthy Japanese or their descendants are trying to collect this money from the U.S. government, and if you help us, we will give you a share. I think that was the con, and I was actually asked to translate the language on these bonds. I was asked to translate it into I forgot what language to what language, Japanese to English or English to Japanese. I've forgotten. But anyway, I was recruited to translate this, and I got my translator's fee. I was probably the only person in that scheme to make any money. I got my fee as a translator. But eventually, it was at a very early stage. It was figured out that these were completely fraudulent pieces of paper, and the thing did not go forward. But later on in the newspaper, I did see something very, very similar, and probably the same people trying to approach someone else. But I think they were arrested later on. There was also the Russian ship that's sitting in the bottom of the ocean, full of gold. And if you help us pull up that ship, we'll give you part of the gold. There was also there was just a whole list of. Oh yeah, there was this. Gentleman who came to me with what were said to be documents showing that he was bringing gold into Korea. Yeah, a whole shipload of gold. And I mean, I calculated the amount of gold that was alleged to be involved, and it turned out to be something like the value was something like equivalent to half of the U.S. federal budget. And this gentleman, again, a Unification Church old-time member, was going to bring this gold into Korea. It's just laughable. And I looked at his documents and I studied them, and I started going through them, counting all the errors in the documents. And I got to 50 and I stopped because it was just, and I called him up and I said I wanted to talk with him, and he said, well, why? He says, well, because I've noticed a few problems with the documents that you've shown me. And he said, well, those errors are there on purpose, so that people who are not involved in the deal will think that these are fraudulent documents. And he says, next week I'm going to bring this gold to Korea, and then you'll see. He was very angry with me. He didn't say, oh, thank you for exposing this fraud. No, he said he was actually very angry with me. Next week I'm going to bring this gold to Korea, and then you'll see, you ignorant Western American. And he didn't say those words, but that was his attitude. You see. Well, it's been many weeks since that, and he has not yet contacted me, and I have not heard of any gold being. I mean, this was so much gold that it would wipe out the Korean national debt on the moment of its arrival in Korea. It was anyway. So religious bodies tend to attract these fraudsters. So it is something that we need to be careful of. And I don't know if this man. It sounds to me like this pastor most likely was taken in, but he obviously did not do his due diligence. And bonds issued by the nationalist Chinese prior to 1949, and you're telling people that they're worth something today. Well, that should create all sorts of warning bells already right there. Yeah, but we are in an age of freedom and responsibility when many of us will be forming our own groups that are loyal to the second king, because we're not trying to create one monolithic pyramid structure. No, the kingdom of God is going to be decentralized, and decentralized means that there's more freedom, more responsibility, and so these fraudsters I guess we'll have less of an opportunity, but in one sense, but in another sense, they'll have a lot of smaller opportunities. So please, if you are approached by this kind of, once-in-a-lifetime deal, don't take any wooden nickels, all right? An interesting situation is happening with regard to Syria. President Trump is freezing funds that have been promised to Syria, and this is signaling a U.S. pullback from Syria. Now, some people, globalists and neocons are up in arms, saying, "Oh, look, this is going to create a power vacuum. Russia and Iran are going to benefit." But this is an indication that President Trump is coming around to a more a policy of disengagement, of having less involvement around the world, which is a good thing. President Donald Trump is freezing more than $200 million in funds for recovery efforts in war-torn Syria amid a reassessment of the role of the U.S. The role the U.S. should play in the drawn-out conflict there, the Wall Street Journal reported on Friday. The White House ordered the State Department to put the funds on hold, the report said. According to the Journal, Trump did so after reading a news report saying that the U.S. had recently committed an additional $200 million to early recovery efforts. Exiting Secretary of State Rex Tillerson pledged the money in February in Kuwait at a meeting of the coalition trying to defeat the Islamic State. The apparent shift comes as the fight against ISIS has reached an impasse, with the insurgent group controlling just 5% of the battered nation but holding fast to it and losing little ground in recent months. Yeah, the 95% was pretty easy, but the final 5% is difficult. The Journal said that a sped-up pullback of America from Syria could kick up concerns about yielding control of the combat-scarred country to Iran and Russia. In the past month, U.S.-led airstrikes supporting local forces on the ground have diminished. In January, Tillerson laid out a strategy in which the U.S. would remain in Syria for the foreseeable future to prevent an ISIS resurgence and keep Iran's influence in check. Now, the Journal said, Trump looks to be questioning that tack. He has said he would like to see regional allies like Saudi Arabia take on more of the burden. Wow, what an interesting idea there. And the White House has asked Gulf Arab states to come up with billions of dollars for Syria's recovery. Well, yeah, because Saudi Arabia is no friend of Iran. Saudi Arabia does not want to see Iran take over Syria. So let Saudi Arabia become more involved in rebuilding Syria. All those petrodollars, they got to put them somewhere, right? The State Department last year spent $200 million on stabilization work in Syria, including removing unexploded weapons and restoring water, power, and electricity, and an additional $225 million in funds was designated this year. The freezing of some or all of those funds, plus the additional spending promised last month, could cause existing programs to halt, U.S. officials told the Journal. Only 2 months ago, Trump's aides thought they'd persuaded him that the U.S. needed to keep its presence in Syria open-ended, not only because the Islamic State group has yet to be entirely defeated, but also because the resulting power vacuum could be filled by other extremist groups or by Iran. But America is not the only good guy in the world. Saudi Arabia can do this. Other countries that have interest there can do this as well. Trump signed off on a major speech in January, in which Secretary of State Rex Tillerson laid out the new strategy and declared it is vital for the United States to remain engaged in Syria. But by mid-February, Trump was telling his top aides in meetings that as soon as victory can be declared against ISIS, he wanted American troops out of Syria, said the officials who spoke to the Associated Press on condition of anonymity because they weren't authorized to speak publicly. Trump's first public suggestion he was itching to pull out came in a news conference with visiting Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull on February 23rd, when Trump said the U.S. was in Syria to, quote, get rid of ISIS and go home, unquote. On Thursday, in a domestic policy speech in Ohio, Trump went further, the AP reported. We'll be coming out of Syria, very soon. Let the other people take care of it now. Very soon, we're coming out, Trump said. The public declaration caught U.S. national security agencies off guard and unsure whether Trump was formally announcing a new unexpected change in policy. The Pentagon and State Department reached out to the White House's National Security Council for clarification. The White House's ambiguous response: Trump's words speak for themselves. The mission of the Department of Defense to defeat ISIS has not changed, said Major Adrian Rankin Galloway, a Pentagon spokesman, according to the AP. Still, without a clear directive from the president, planning has not started for a withdrawal from Syria, officials said, and Trump has not advocated a specific timetable. For Trump, who campaigned on an America First mantra, Syria is just the latest foreign arena where his impulse has been to limit the U.S. role. Like with NATO and the United Nations, Trump has called for other governments to step up and share more of the burden so that Washington doesn't foot the bill. His administration has been crisscrossing the globe, seeking financial commitments from other countries to fund reconstruction in both Syria and Iraq, but with only limited success, AP said. This is not the 1960s, when America was the preeminent, richest country in the world. After World War II, there was the Marshall Plan for rebuilding Germany that was done by the United States. But this is a different situation. Now, the world is in a very, very, very different situation now. And a lot of other countries should get involved. And U.S. Maybe should not even have the major role in this. The U.S. could take a minor role, but why should the U.S. always be taking a major role in these things? Well, the globalists and the neocons want the U.S. to be involved in these places for the foreseeable future. Korea, Japan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, all these places involved for the foreseeable future, and that's not a good thing at all for U.S. troops who are there. For one thing, America needs to limit its role, to look at its situation and limit its role and start rebuilding America. How about that? Start rebuilding America. We can take a break and come back and look at it. But even in Philadelphia, there are unpoliceable areas. I was reading the other day. Let's see if I can find that. But we're rebuilding how many countries now? That's not a good idea. Let's take a break now. We'll come back with other news from a Chunuk perspective in just a minute.
Folks, and look at what I've got here today. My God, take a look at this. This is a BFR in 454 Casull with an octagonal barrel, magna porting, micarta grips. And look at that, it even has my initials on it, JM. Look at that thing of beauty, my God. Pop open the cartridge insertion door. And look at that cylinder spin. The finest revolvers in the world. That's a cannon. That's a cannon. Oh, man. That's our target. Oh boy. Massive recoil.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, March 31st, 2018. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of China, Hyung Moon. I couldn't find that article that I read about one particular area of Philadelphia being unpoliceable. But so I want to move on to something entirely different. Yesterday was Good Friday, and tomorrow Easter by the Western Christian tradition. Western meaning in the 11th century, of course, Christianity split between the East and West, West being centered on Rome and the East being centered on what was then Constantinople, today Istanbul. And the two halves of Christianity disagree on when Easter is, among other things. But tomorrow is the Easter in that Western Rome-centered tradition. Of course, the Protestant churches follow the Rome-centered calculation for Easter. So the question is, okay, so just exactly how come tomorrow is Easter? Who decided that tomorrow is Easter? Because the Father, was praying on one Easter morning in 1935 when Jesus came to him. That was an entirely different date. Who decides what date Easter falls on? And you see here that this is decided by Pope Gregory XIII, or at least the calendar to which he gave his name. Easter is an annual festival observed throughout the Christian world. The date for Easter shifts every year within the Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian calendar is the standard international calendar for civil use. In addition, it regulates the ceremonial cycle of the Roman Catholic Church and Protestant churches. The current Gregorian ecclesiastical rules that determine the date of Easter trace back to 325 CE, or the CE stands for Christian era, or you might say 325 AD, Anno Domini, 325 at the First Council of Nicaea, convened by Roman Emperor Constantine. At that time, the Roman world used the Julian calendar put in place by Julius Caesar. The council decided to keep Easter on a Sunday, the same Sunday throughout the world, to fix incontrovertibly the date for Easter and to make it determinable indefinitely in advance. The council constructed special tables to compute the date. These tables were revised in the following few centuries, resulting eventually in the tables constructed by the 6th century abbot of Scythia, Dionysius Exiguus. Nonetheless, different means of calculations continued in use throughout the Christian world. Universal adoption of this Gregorian calendar occurred slowly. By the 1700s, though most of Western Europe had adopted the Gregorian calendar, the Eastern Christian churches still determine the Easter dates using the older Julian calendar method. That's why in the Orthodox tradition, Easter is not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow. It'll be April 8th. The usual statement that Easter is the first Sunday after the full moon that occurs next after the vernal equinox is not a precise statement of the actual ecclesiastical rules. The full moon involved is not the astronomical full moon, but an ecclesiastical moon, determined from tables. that keeps more or less in step with the astronomical moon. So today is the, said at the beginning, today is the 15th day of the heavenly calendar month, and the heavenly calendar takes its cue from the lunar calendar. And when Father established the heavenly calendar, he said that the solar and the lunar calendars would aid the heavenly calendar from a Cain and Abel position. And that is to say that the lunar calendar is in the Abel position, but Cain position, solar calendar, also aids that, solar calendar being specifically the Gregorian calendar, we assume. But Father said that Yangnyeok wa Umnyeok, so Yangnyeok means the solar calendar. So by the lunar calendar, today is the 15th day, and so and in the heavenly calendar is based on astronomical observations by a an astronomical observatory located in Korea. And so the exact date of the full moon, the 15th day of each month, is supposed to be the full moon. And if you look up in the sky tonight, if you're in an area where you can see it, and I saw it this morning, it looks pretty full. But I don't know if it's exactly tonight. But it can be a day or so different. So that's why the lunar calendar of Korea and the lunar calendar of China are different. Remember last year we had a situation where Korea repeated the 5th month of the lunar calendar, while China repeated the 6th month of the lunar calendar. And we were commenting last year how this was because of the 1 hour time difference between Korea and China. It's because of the exact moment of the full moon can be different depending on where you are on the earth. And so that was the reason that occurred, that difference occurred between Korea and China last year. So the Council of Nicaea then said, well, we can't have that. We can't have, different dates in different countries. And so we're going to, instead of having the actual astronomical moon being the astronomical full moon being the standard, we're going to have an ecclesiastical moon. And you can say, what on earth is that? Ecclesiastical moon? Well, Wikipedia has a whole article on that, and you can look at it. I haven't really figured it out yet. But anyway, that's what it is. So the full moon involved is not the astronomical full moon, but the ecclesiastical moon, determined from tables that keeps more or less in step with the astronomical moon. The ecclesiastical rules are that Easter falls on the first Sunday following the first ecclesiastical full moon that occurs on or after the day of the vernal equinox. This particular ecclesiastical full moon is the 14th day of the tabular lunar lunation, that is new moon, and the vernal equinox is fixed as March 21st. So the vernal equinox is fixed as March 21st. Now, for us this year, the vernal equinox occurred on March 20th. Remember that? It was about in the Cheonrygung time, it was about 12:45 or 12:50 p.m. on March 20th. But Council of Nicaea says, we don't care about that. We're just going to say March 21st is the vernal equinox, resulting in that Easter can never occur before March 22nd or later than April 25th. The Gregorian dates for the ecclesiastical full moon come from the Gregorian tables. Therefore, the civil date of Easter depends upon which tables, Gregorian or pre-Gregorian, are used. The Western Roman Catholic and Protestant Christian churches use the Gregorian tables. Many Eastern Orthodox Christian churches use the older tables based on the Julian calendar. There are some anomalies in certain years, but generally it works as outlined. So here again, so Father established the heavenly calendar based on the lunar calendar, and people said, well, no. But guess what? This is the tradition. This is actually the Christian tradition to use the lunar calendar. It says the 14th day of lunation. Is that the word they use? 14th day of a tabular lunation, or in parentheses, new moon. What they're doing is they're using the lunar calendar, 14th day. that is on or near the full moon each month. So Father was actually in line with Christian tradition when he established the heavenly calendar in this way. And the role of the solar calendar then is to provide a way of the heavenly calendar staying more or less in line with the movement of the sun as well as the moon, and that is why every 19 years, where did I say? I think it was 7 times, right? 7 years out of every 19, an extra month is inserted into the heavenly calendar, so as to keep it more or less in line with the movement of the sun. And there's a 19-year cycle. As if you if you do that, 7 months are inserted into the lunar calendar every 19 years. Then, after 19 years, the difference between the lunar calendar, let's call it the heavenly calendar, and the Gregorian calendar will only be about 2.5 hours. So it keeps it very, very close to the movement of the sun. So anyway, that's how Easter is decided. So first of all, it was the Council of Nicaea. So we're still living under the Council of Nicaea, and we're still living under the influence of the Roman Empire, because the Gregorian calendar, of course, is not the Julian calendar, not the calendar that Julius Caesar established, but it's a version of the Julian calendar. It's basically a kind of a reformation of the Julian calendar by Pope Gregory the 13th. So we're still living under those powers that were, 2,000 years ago, or 1,500 years, 1,600 years ago. But Father was establishing a new tradition, saying, let's let those Roman gods go to bed. Let's put them away where they belong, and let's have a new calendar, and let's establish it can stay in the Cain position, but let's have a new calendar based on the moon and the lunar calendar, which was itself, actually, the solar lunar calendar itself was first established in East Asia by Jesuit missionaries, actually. That's another story. Okay, let's take a break, and we'll come back with our Rima after this short break.
Firearms, Magnum Research, and Auto Ordnance. The Car Firearms Group. With a diverse product line that blends American craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. It's no secret why gun enthusiasts choose Car Firearms Group. From the Desert Eagle and Baby Desert Eagle made famous by Hollywood. The history of the 1911 and the Tommy gun. To the best in compact concealed carry. Car Firearms Group is not only the first name in personal defense, it's a name that has earned the respect of gun enthusiasts around the world. Concealment, innovative technology, value, accuracy, and history. Car Firearms Group. Made in the USA. Visit car.com today.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, March 31st, 2018, on this Easter weekend by the Roman Western tradition. Let's see. Okay, I thought I was in John 9, but actually I'm in John 19. I'm giving my Rima now. Let me just go to that. Yes, I'm in John 19, chapter 19, verse 12. And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, If thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whosoever maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar. So this was the voice of state-controlled religion, which was a problem then and is still a problem now. And people ask why, Father didn't speak of the rod of iron being a gun, or why Father did not emphasize more the kingship. And I think it's fairly obvious. Of course, Father did. He crowned Jesus, and he crowned true God, and he crowned himself in the Senate office building on Capitol Hill, even and so he did speak very clearly about kingship. But if he had emphasized that more than what he had, then, well, look what happened to Jesus. That the religious leaders of that time went to the state authority and said, look what this man is doing. He's proclaiming himself king. He's obviously engaged in sedition. He's trying to take over the country, take over the government. And so both Father and Jesus acted very wisely in these ways. Same with the rod of iron. Yes, if you go through Father's words, he says over and over again that the rod of iron is the word of God. But on the other hand, we also see that he was very much involved in the production of weapons to the extent that the law would allow. As the king has testified, he started one of the first weapons companies, gun companies in Korea after the liberation of Korea from Japan. And of course, in the beginning, it was an air rifle that was being produced, but that was what the law would allow then. And later on, there was a shotgun that was being produced, and Father was extremely happy and glad when Tongil Industries, later Tongil Heavy Industries, was able to produce the Vulcan cannon for the Korean military. I once heard a story about how President Moon of the Tongil Industries managed to get that technology from the United States in a somewhat unofficial manner. But anyway, he was permitted more or less after the fact by the United States. And Tongil Industries was producing that very powerful weapon for the Korean military, and Father was very, very proud of it, an M1 carbine as well. But there were people around Father who were not united with this aspect and who did not understand the need for the Messiah to engage in this type of industry, or they could have seen then that the rod of iron was not only the Word of God. In the internal sense, of course, it's the Word of God, but also in an external sense, it is weaponry, and it is the weapons that are the most advanced. And the King has revealed to us that the rod of iron and today is the AR-15, and that may change later on if more advanced weapons are created that can be carried around easily by individuals. But for today, it is the AR-15. Jesus was charged with declaring himself king, and the religious leaders of that time said to Pilate, look, when he calls himself king, he's speaking against Caesar, because only Caesar, who is the emperor, can decide who is going to be the king of the Jews. And if we read on, well, first, it's interesting to read the context of that statement here. Let's go back to verse 10. Then saith Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have the power to crucify thee and have power to release thee? And Jesus answered, Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin. So Jesus is actually sort of saying to Pilate, Pilate, you're just a pawn in this whole situation. You're just a pawn, so I'm not going to hold this against you. But he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin. And therefore, and from thenceforth, Pilate sought to release him. So Pilate, was fairly sympathetic towards Jesus. But the Jews cried out, saying, If thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whosoever maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar. So that was verse 12 that we read in the beginning. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he saith unto the Jews, Behold your king. But they cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate said unto them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priest answered, We have no king but Caesar. Wow, what a statement. And, this is a statement that is also being made by established Christianity today. And what the king routinely refers to as state-run Christianity. And this was state-run Judaism. This was not true Judaism. These chief priests did not represent the true Judaic tradition of Moses. They were a state-run Judaism when they said that we have no king but Caesar. Really now? Wow. What would David think of that? What would Solomon say of that? Then delivered he him therefore unto them to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away. And then when Jesus is being crucified, Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross. And the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This title then read many of the Jews, so many of the Jews read it, for the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh to the city, it was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Then said the chief priests of the Jews to Pilate, Write not the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am King of the Jews. So again, the chief priests, the state-run Judaism, the state-run religious body of that time, is denying that Jesus is their king, and saying that don't write that he's our king, write simply that he said that he's self-proclaimed king. That's what they wanted to say. Maybe the phrase self-proclaimed didn't exist back then, but if they had, I'm sure they would have wanted to use it. So don't say that he was our king, but say that he said, I am the King of the Jews. So what did Pilate say? Pilate answered, What I have written, I have written. Hey, I'm not going to rewrite what I wrote. That's not what I do. So that was the conversation, the give and take between the state-run religious leaders of that time and Pilate. Very interesting that these chief priests were trying to demonstrate their loyalty to the Roman Empire. And they were afraid that Jesus was going to ruin that relationship between them and the Roman Empire. That if Jesus were allowed to live, that Rome might become angry with them and perhaps would persecute them. And this was their fear. And so they wanted to make sure that he was killed. Because that was a way of protecting their position with Rome. is a completely state-run state-run organization, and we see the same thing today in Protestant Christianity. This pastor who was indicted yesterday for selling fake bonds was head of a church of 17,000, a United Methodist Church. Very much of a state-run church as well. And I think the treatment of Father by the United Methodist Church and other churches that call themselves mainline churches, that is to say, basically mainline churches are the members of the National Council of Churches USA. They include the Episcopalian Church and the couple of the major Presbyterian denominations, and even I think a Baptist denomination is there, and also the Catholic Church I think is also a member of NCC USA, National Council of Churches of Christ USA I think is their actual name, and of course their headquarters are in what is referred to often as the Protestant Vatican. Do they still have their offices there? When I was growing up as the son of a Methodist minister, always, this address on Riverside Drive in New York City, I can't remember the exact address now, but it's a building on Riverside Drive in New York City where most of the major Protestant denominations had their headquarters offices. I seem to remember the number 475 Riverside Drive, but I'm not really sure right now. Anyway, that was a very important address for us as for our family as I was growing up, because that was where all the stuff would come from, all the materials would come from there, from my father to do his missionary work in Japan. But these are really, but their treatment of Father during his mission on earth was very similar to the way that the chief priests in Jesus' time treated him. Always afraid that this man was going to upset their relationship with the government, because they had a cushy relationship with the government. Anyway, on this was not planned. I simply opened the Bible at random, and I was led to this verse in John 19:12, where Jesus is standing before Pilate. I want to go now to the Cheonseongyung, a very different Rima in the Cheonseongyung. Fathers, this is in the book on etiquette, and chapter 4, section 10, page 1083 in this e-edition, electronic edition. Teachings on purity. 10.1, strictly follow the commandment during adolescence. When you enter adolescence, your eyes are opened to the opposite sex, and all your thoughts concentrate on that issue, do they not? All the actions of the cells in your body focus in on that. Yeah, adolescence is a very difficult time in many ways. Almost all of us have survived that period, unfortunately. If you look at youth in adolescence, you will see girls flutter their eyelashes, wear colorful clothes, and go around tightening their bottoms. If their bottoms look big, it is a disaster. Trying to avoid being ashamed of that, they go around making their bottoms seem smaller. The time when people can fully use all their wisdom and all their physical attributes 100% is during young adulthood. All of the cells work 100%. Only at that time will they be totally in action. Why do girls wear beautiful, colorful clothes? They are like colorful love signals. There are many unusual winds blowing in the world nowadays. Unification Church members must never be swayed by such trends. That kind of adolescence is not 사춘기. 사춘기 is the key, meaning in this case, key is a period or period of time. And sa it means to think of or is a thought, and chun is the Chinese character for spring. So the time of thinking of spring. And spring is I think it is used. I think this etymology comes from a couple of different ways. One is that spring, of course, is the time when animals often procreate, but also spring is the when a person is in adolescence, they're in kind of the spring of their life. I think that's why this is used. Sachungi is the word in Korean to refer to adolescence, or this here is translated as time of thinking of spring. But Sachungi, now the word sa originally is the Chinese character to think, as I said. But Father says, if you're not careful, the sa will not be the time of meaning to think, but time of another Chinese character, which means death. So the time of the death of spring. So if you're not careful, it can be the time of the death of spring. Which one would you choose? The one with the character for sa meaning thinking, or that one with the character for sa meaning death? So it can be a time of death when if we commit sin, if we fall away from God, if we commit to sexual fall, then God is the life. God is our life, and so if we cut ourselves away from God by committing sin, by committing the sexual fall, then that is death. And so adolescence can be a time of death. Unfortunately, that is the case with too many people now. Many people have been born into the second generation status, but many have fallen away from that and are now receiving blessing or receiving a first generation blessing. Some people want to say that if you're born as second generation, you're always second generation, even if you fall. I'm going to get into that whole thing. But the blessing that they receive is a first generation blessing. In other words, it is a blessing where the participants have to go through the same course as we did, the first generation went through. In other words, holy wine, blessing, 40-day separation, 3-day ceremony, indemnity stick, ceremony, and so forth. And of course, the children of that blessing, they can be second generation. They will be born into second generation status as based on the repentance of their parents. And it has happened that sometimes a second generation who has fallen will not disclose that or will lie about it and pretend to be a second generation in the blessing. But there is no lying in spirit world. There is no lying to God, is there? God knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows the number of hairs on our head. So there's no lying to God. And so if a second generation who has fallen lies about that or fails to disclose that and pretends to receive the second generation blessing, that blessing will still be a first generation blessing. It will not be a second generation blessing. But then if they don't complete the change of blood lineage status, then their children will not be second generation either, because they will have not done the 3-day ceremony or the other conditions. So by lying and by failing to disclose, they're simply prolonging the suffering, prolonging and extending the date when their lineage can be brought back to God. And I know it's very painful for both the children and the parents. It feels like the the sky has fallen in. When you first hear that your daughter has fallen or that your son has fallen. But it's a very necessary step to go through, if that is the case. Always we have to face reality and deal with reality. That is the most important thing, I think, in God's providence. Father was always aware of exactly what the reality was of this world. He was more aware of it than any of us were. And, you know, in the Second Kings course since 2013, Father has guided him in a course of discovery of how much evil there is in the world. You know, the Second King has been accused of going along with various conspiracy theories and all this, but in the end, it turns out that Father has been guiding him in a course of discovering the true evil in this world, what is going on in this world. And it's important for anyone who is leading the providence and who is representing Father in this world to understand how much evil there is in the world. And so for that reason, I'm tremendously grateful to Father for guiding the Second King in this way, and I'm tremendously grateful to the Second King for uniting with Father's guidance in this way, despite all the criticism and the mockery that he has received and continues to receive. And parents, too, need to understand the reality of our children. Because at the time of adolescence, especially if your kids are in public school, especially if they are in public school, there is a significant chance that they will be led to the sexual fall by that satanic environment. But the environment is improving, and I think probably, you know, I know the children of the earliest blessed couples in America, those who were the children of couples who were blessed. The first couples in America were blessed in 1969 as a part of the 43 couple blessing, which is an extension of the 430 couple blessing that had occurred in Korea the year before. And the children of that blessing, I can understand, had almost no chance of being able to survive the turmoil and the attack that came upon them from the surrounding environment. Those of us who were blessed in 1982, our children had much better chance, and in some cases have actually survived. But still, probably close to a majority, or perhaps a majority of our children as well, of that 2,075 blessing and the 6,000 couple blessing in Korea. Perhaps a majority of them have also committed the sexual fall, and have not been able to receive, are not able to receive the second generation blessing. But I think, but certainly more of our children have received the blessing, second generation blessing, than of those 43 couples, or the 777 couples, or the 1,800 couples. So, as we go along, as God's foundation of goodness becomes larger and larger, there are more and more children who are successfully able to reach that point. And so, if those children repent now and receive the first generation blessing, so that their children can be second generation, then the chances of their children growing up to receive a second generation blessing will be much greater. And so, if anyone is listening who is in that position, I would like to call on you to repent now, so that your children can receive a second generation blessing. These have to be children who are born after the 3-day ceremony and after the change of blood lineage. This morning on this Western Easter weekend, Father guides us to think again about purity especially purity during adolescence. Did Jesus go through adolescence or not? Did Jesus not only go through adolescence? Did Jesus not also go through adolescence? Sometimes the translation is a bit awkward. What kind of adolescence did he have? The one of thinking of spring or the one of the death of spring? He did not have the kind in which he whistled at girls. He went through adolescence with the character meaning thinking of spring. So Jesus and Father both successfully passed through this adolescent period. And that was why that was the reason that they were able to take on the mission of the Messiah. Jesus was fully man and fully God, and Father also fully man and fully God. But being fully man means that they also went through the temptations of being a man. But they overcame those temptations, showing that it is possible for a man to overcome those temptations and to receive God's blessing. All right, let's take a break, and we'll come back then again with more news from a Chunrigu perspective after this.
We kind of like lost the sense of like why we were doing this, like why we were going through this, and kind of felt rushed because we only knew each other for about 2 months actually.
Only 1 month.
1 month? Yeah. Okay, 1 month before the matching ceremony we had. And so yeah, we started having a hard time. And so like for me, like, you know, you get kind of fooled by Hollywood, and I think that's where my biggest trouble was, because I didn't know how to be an actual good husband at that time and how to like really work with a woman before. So Hyun really gave me clear direction. Basically, you know, he just said like, you know, you have to be strong, you have to be, you know, confident in yourself and not be so worried about yourself. You have to be confident in who you are, kind of thing.
The more I had to wait, the more attacking was getting much more intense, and I was really struggling at the time. So, you know, and you know, I could feel Satan was just trying to attack me, playing with my emotions, making me really complicated and confused. And it got to the point where it turned me very negative about the blessing. So, and that time I knew the way to overcome this situation was, you know, just holding on to God and His words, because I don't think I'll be ever to overcome this situation alone. You know, that time I really felt I really need God by my side. So I started doing conditions, prayer and Rima. And doing that, through that, I really realized, you know, God was really straightforward to me and just, you know, sending these messages to me, you know, telling me to be thankful. I realized, you know, God really wanted this blessing to happen.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, March 31st, 2018, on this Easter weekend by the Roman tradition. Let's look at some stories in the worldtribune.com. That's a very interesting news portal, worldtribune.com. Here's a story on that portal. Murder rate near zero in Switzerland where teens enter shooting competitions. This was written a few days ago. Switzerland has a high rate of gun ownership, a murder rate near zero, and no mass shootings. The country of 8.3 million people has about 2 million privately owned guns. In 2016, there were 47 homicides with firearms, according to a report by Business Insider. There has not been a mass shooting in Switzerland since 2001, when a man entered a local parliament in Zug, killing 14 people and then himself, according to the report. Media outlets, including Time magazine and the BBC, have reported that the Swiss view gun ownership as a patriotic duty, and gun owners take training very seriously. Switzerland also has a hugely popular annual shooting contest for teens aged 13 to 17. The contest, Zurich's Nabenschießen, I guess you pronounce that, dates back to the 1600s. The competition, once open only to boys, has included teenage girls since 1991. Kids in the country flocked to the competition every September to compete in target shooting using Swiss Army Service rifles. They're proud to show off how well they can shoot, Business Insider noted in a March 24th report. Accuracy is prized above all else, and a Schützenkönig, or a king or queen of marksmen, is crowned. See, king or queen of marksmen. A king or queen is crowned. Military service is mandatory for men in Switzerland, and all men between the ages of 18 and 24 deemed fit for service are given a pistol or a rifle and trained. After they've finished their service, the men can typically buy and keep their service weapons, but they have to get a permit for them, the report said. Having an armed citizenry has helped keep the Swiss neutral for more than 200 years, the report added. Switzerland hasn't taken part in any international armed conflict since 1815, but some Swiss soldiers help with peacekeeping missions around the world. In Switzerland, those convicted of a crime or with an alcohol or drug addiction record are prohibited from buying guns, and anyone who expresses a violent or dangerous attitude is not allowed to own a gun. Gun owners who want to carry their weapon for defensive purposes also have to prove they can properly load, unload, and shoot their weapon. They must pass a test to get a license. So that is the Switzerland situation. So this is pretty contradictory of the mantra that the left has, that guns cause violence. I really point to the 1990 law establishing gun-free zones around schools as being the major cause of mass shootings that we have in the United States. And I think it's really terrible that the media is not focusing on that law, and that they continue to support that law by not mentioning it, by not calling it out. This was a law that was sponsored primarily by Joe Biden, then Senator Joe Biden, later Vice President, and now potential possible presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, unless he's too old. And it was signed by George H.W. Bush. And I think the results of that law are pretty clear. And another cause of the mass shootings, we can point to the pharmaceuticals. These psychotropic drugs, or these drugs for dealing with mental situations, are taken, I think, far more often by Americans than by any other citizens in the world. That has not been explored by the media. What is the rate? I'd like to see a report on comparing the rate of consumption of those drugs by Americans as opposed to people in other parts of the world. I'm sure there's a huge difference there. I wish I had the numbers. I don't have them now. But just based on my own anecdotal experience, there's a huge difference. Americans take those drugs at a much higher rate than other people around the world. And that would seem to also indicate a cause for the mass shootings. Whereas this Switzerland situation would seem to indicate that guns don't have as much to do about it as the left often alleges. Get rid of all guns. Get rid of those psychotropic drugs. Get rid of that 1990 law. That's what I would say. Okay. Another interesting article on World Tribune. Lacking a catastrophic quake, California finds other ways to split from USA. This is an opinion piece by Saul W. Sanders. Let's see, who is he? Okay, it just says that he's a contributing editor for WorldTribune.com. There always seemed to be the possibility that there could be a really big rumble along the San Andreas Fault, and Hollywood, San Francisco's hills, and the wild northern California coast would slide into the Pacific. The state has had its brownouts with two governors, father and son, and their spendthrift administrations with other similar governments spread along the way of Junior's present tenure. Still, with its almost 40 million people, the crumbling welfare state carries on with a quarter of the country's illegal aliens. They don't speak English at home, nor do these undocumented seem to be bothered with U.S. citizenship, much less legal residence. 2/3 have lived in the state for at least a decade. But California's increasingly shaky finances, a current $190 billion state budget, has an estimated $1.6 billion deficit. And what appears to be a switch to a new outflow of population may be redrawing the picture of what has been. Most of the population growth this past year came from local births, which outpaced deaths by 220,000. Although total net migration added 80,000 people, more moved out of California than in from other U.S. states. In fact, this out-migration has increasingly been the state's middle class, taking with them the long-time admired entrepreneurial history of the state, to the benefit of welcoming Texas among California's other western neighbors. Foreign immigration made up the difference between the outflow and the relatively stable total, bringing it nearer the 40 million mark, larger by far than Canada or Australia. That these immigrants are illegals or undocumented may explain more than anything else why California's Democratic politicians are all for allowing even illegal felons to get a pass, not only escape deportation, but criminal prosecution as well. The state has enacted a sanctuary law which is supposed to protect otherwise illegal aliens in the U.S. This has led to a free-for-all between federal officials, particularly ICE, Immigration and Custom Enforcement, and some local, state, and municipal authorities. This, in turn, is leading to a civil war among local and state government jurisdictions who oppose the protection of felons. The current free-for-all between the federal authorities of the Trump administration with Mayor Libby Schaaf of Oakland, its long-term unemployed average of 8.52%, went so far as for her to warn local illegals with criminal records, some of them convicted felons, that the feds were coming to get them. California city and state officials, as a result of all this, are using California's size, its population bigger by 1/3 than Texas, its nearest rival, to defy federal law. Nothing quite like it judicially has been seen since the 1850s. An argument then which had to be decided in a fearfully bloody struggle, still more casualties than all our other conflicts. The policy and legal confusion being created is hard to exaggerate, and the Trump administration is going to be forced to take up the cudgels for federal jurisdiction. The longer the wait, the more likely the confusion will grow. There was a time when California was supposed to set the patterns for progressives, the old use, not the new use of the word, development in the rest of the country, for progressive development in the rest of the country. For example, remember when no one ate their salad first? Let's hope that is now a bygone American custom. Referring to the 1850s, of course, leading up to the situation in America, leading up to the presidential election of 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected as an anti-slavery candidate, and some of the states in the southern United States chose to secede. And they used the 10th Amendment because the Constitution does not mention anything about secession. But the 10th Amendment to the Constitution says that any power not specifically given to the federal government belongs to the states and the people and the citizens of the country. And so they said, okay, well, since the Constitution does not say anything about this, then I guess that means that we can secede from the Union anytime we want to, and by any process that we want to. So that's what they did. And of course, they lost the war, and the federal government made sure that that never happened again. But we may be coming full circle now. California now is making this noise, and if, as is very possible, the King has pointed out, is very possible, if the Trump administration turns out to be only a respite in this move towards socialism in America, then after Trump, maybe other states will go along this path. Texas, in particular, may go along this path. But one way or another, the United States seems to be moving towards a situation where there will be a breakup. And I don't see any reason why the United States will not go through the, we can say the United States will never go through the same process or similar process as what happened to the Soviet Union. There's no reason why U.S. has to be exempt from that kind of a situation. I'm not saying it's going to happen this year or next, or even during the next 5 years, but it can definitely can happen. A story that came up yesterday, which is continuing to rock the Christian world, or at least the Catholic world, is this statement by the Pope that there is no hell. And the World Tribune has an article on that. Let's take a look at that. Pope's no hell interview rocks the Catholic world. The Vatican scrambled to clarify a report by an Italian journalist which quoted Pope Francis as saying there is no hell. The Vatican said no quotations in the March 29 article by La Repubblica founder Eugenio Scalfari should be considered as a faithful transcription of the Pope's words. In the interview, Scalfari asked the pontiff, "What about bad souls? Where are they punished?" "Bad souls are not punished," Pope Francis is quoted as saying, adding, "Those who do not repent and cannot therefore be forgiven disappear. There is no hell, there is the disappearance of sinful souls." A very interesting Christian doctrine. I think that's quite new, I think. Quite false as well. But anyway, that's not the only thing that's false about the Catholic Church, so let's go on here. Catholic Church doctrine affirms the existence of hell, where the souls of sinners descend into and suffer eternal fire. Now let's think about eternal fire. I've had conversations about that with Protestants as well. But let's remember that God intended to create a world of goodness. And yes, if people don't repent, then they will not be able to come out of hell for eternity. They will not be able to come out of this fire. The fire, of course, that is the Word of God. I mean, because the Word of God burns us. When you are surrounded by the Word of God, that is a very difficult and painful situation. Meanwhile, just hours after the Pope is alleged to have denied the existence of hell, the Vatican sealed off part of St. Peter's Basilica after chunks of plaster rained down on worshippers. The plaster fell near Michelangelo's famed Pieta statue on March 29th, near the main entrance. No one was injured. Vatican spokesman Greg Burke said repairmen are working to secure the site, and the basilica remained open. He said it would remain open as normal on March 30th. Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the most senior Catholic in England and Wales, told the BBC there's nowhere in Catholic teaching that actually says any one person is in hell. Adding Pope Francis was apparently exploring the imagery of hell, fire and brimstone, and all of that. Nichols added, that's never been a part of Catholic teaching. It's been a part of Catholic iconography, part of Christian iconography. Columnist Pat Buchanan wrote that if there is no hell, what did Christ die on the cross to save us from? Buchanan noted, on the first Holy Thursday, Judas betrayed Christ. And of Judas, the Lord said, "Woe to that man by whom the Son of Man shall be betrayed. If it were better for him if that man had never been born." Did the soul of Judas and those of the monstrous evildoers of history just fade away, as General Douglas MacArthur said of old soldiers? If there's no hell, is not the greatest deterrent to the worst of sins removed? Well, we don't. Not sinning is not a matter of a deterrent. At least, all right, at a very foundational level, I suppose it is. Not sinning, as the divine principle says, especially if you're in the direct dominion, not sinning is a matter of knowing the effects of sin, understanding the pain that sin causes to God and to the people around us, and the damage that it does to my own soul, my own spirit body. That's why we don't sin. It's not for fear of going someplace. It's not the greatest deterrent to the worst of sins. Anyway, I suppose for some people it is, But that would be a very elementary, even primal, even very barbaric level, I think. Anybody who has, some degree of maturity of character will understand that, the reason I don't kill someone, that I don't murder someone, is not because I'm afraid of going to hell, all right? It's because I know the right from wrong, and I want to be a good person, right? So, greatest deterrent, I don't know. Buchanan continued, had the Pope been speaking ex cathedra as the vicar of Christ on earth, he would be contradicting 2,000 years of Catholic doctrine rooted in the teachings of Christ himself. He would be calling into question papal infallibility, as defined in 1870 by the Vatican Council of Pius IX. Questions would arise as to whether Francis is a true pope. The Vatican statement on Francis' interview, Buchanan wrote, will not do. This does not answer the questions the Pope raised in this chat. Does hell exist? Are souls that die in mortal sin damned to hell for all eternity? Does the Pope accept this belief? Is this still the infallible teaching of the Roman Catholic Church? Well, yeah, it's good that Catholics are being forced to examine their faith, and we hope that it brings the people in the Catholic Church closer to Christ. Let's just put it that way. That will bring the people who are in the Catholic Church, the good people who are in the Catholic Church, should be brought closer to Christ, and that can be done by the process of examining their faith and seeing what it is that they actually believe. I want to get into the Pennsylvania news a little bit later. We'll probably do that in the 7 o'clock hour, but let's continue a little bit longer with the news of around the world. Israeli F-35s entered Iranian airspace undetected, locked on suspected nuclear sites. Another story in the worldtribune.com. 2 Israeli F-35 stealth fighters flew undetected over Iranian airspace in the past month, according to a report. Kuwaiti newspaper Al Jarida reported on March 29th that the 2 F-35s flew over Syrian and Iraqi airspace to reach Iran and circled at high altitude above Persian Gulf sites suspected of being associated with Iran's nuclear program. The report added that the F-35s went undetected by radar, including the Russian radar system located in Syria. The report cited a source as saying the F-35s are capable of traveling from Israel to Iran twice without refueling. The stealth fighters locked on locations in the Iranian cities of Bandar Abbas, Isfahan, and Shiraz, the report said. The newspaper's source refused to confirm if the Israeli mission was carried out in coordination with the United States, which has recently conducted joint exercises with the Israel Defense Forces, IDF. On March 21st, the IDF cleared for publication that Israel was behind the 2007 destruction of a nuclear reactor that was under construction in northern Syria. In February, Israeli F-16 fighter jets entered Syrian airspace, striking 12 Iranian targets in Syria in response to an Iranian drone that was shot down over Israel. All right? Let's take another break, and we'll be back with more news from a Choniguk perspective after this.
Hi there, folks, and look at what I've got here today. My God, take a look at this. This is a BFR in 454 Kasul with an octagonal barrel, magna porting, micarta grips. And look at that, it even has my initials on it, JM. Look at that thing of beauty, my God. Pop open the cartridge insertion door, and look at that cylinder spin. The finest revolvers in the world. That's a cannon. That's a cannon. Oh, man. Pretty accurate, though. That's our target. Oh boy! Massive recoil.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, March 31st, 2018, 9th year of Cheonggi, the second month and the 15th day of the month by the heavenly calendar. Let's look at Pennsylvania politics now. A new poll shows Governor Tom Wolf with a wide lead against Scott Wagner in Pennsylvania governor's race. This year in Pennsylvania, we'll be electing a governor, one of the two senators, and, of course, members of the House of Representatives throughout the state. And in previous broadcast, I played interviews by the three candidates, Republican candidates who are running in the primary to go up against the Democratic incumbent for House of Representatives here in the 8th District of Pennsylvania, which includes the area around Cheonggi Palace. But this article talks about the other two races that are important in Pennsylvania this year. That is the governor's race, where Governor Tom Wolf, which, by the way, Huffington Post rated Governor Tom Wolf the most liberal governor in the country. Now, they rated all the governors, and Tom Wolf was number one as the most liberal governor in the country. It's very frustrating that we have such a man governing over the area of Cheongguk. And then we have Bob Casey, the senator, also a Democratic senator, who is up for re-election this year. Unfortunately, the polls at the moment are showing that it's going to be difficult for Republicans to win those races. Let's see what's going on here. But remember, these polls are a very unexact science, as we've seen. I'm trying to see if someone's trying to reach me right now. Anyway, let's look at this article on the poll where it's alleged that Tom Wolf is in a comfortable position. U.S. Senator Bob Casey and Governor Tom Wolf led their likely Republican opponents by wide margins in the first major independent poll of their election races this year. Casey, a Democrat, had the support of 43% of voters, compared to 25% for Representative Lou Barletta, according to the Franklin and Marshall College poll released Wednesday. Now, the Republicans are having a primary on May 15th. And if you want to vote in that primary, by the way, you have to register by April 16th. And if you've moved in the last 2 years, you have to re-register by April 16th so that you can vote in your own neighborhood, your own precinct. That primary will decide who will actually go up against Tom Wolf and who will go up against Bob Casey. The state Republican committee has already endorsed certain people, and this man Lou Barletta, who's currently a member of the House of Representatives, has been endorsed by the state Republican committee to go up against Bob Casey. Bob Casey for the Senate seat. But this poll says that the support for Barletta is only 25% as compared to 43% for the current governor, Tom Wolf. Wolf, also a Democrat, topped, Bob Casey, 43% for Bob Casey. Now let's talk about Wolf. Wolf, also a Democrat, topped each of the three major Republican governor candidates by at least 17 percentage points, with State Senator Scott Wagner showing best in a head-to-head matchup against the governor. Wolf led Wagner by 38% to 21%, retired healthcare consultant Paul Mango of Allegheny County 49% to 22%, and lawyer Laura Ellsworth 51% to 22%. The poll surveyed 423 voters between March 19th and Monday. It has a margin of error of plus or minus 6.8 percentage points, meaning each number could be off by that much. So far, Casey and Wolf seem poised to benefit from a wave of Democratic support expected in the November 6th election, said G. Terry Madonna, Ph.D., the poll director. The Republicans have a huge uphill climb, in part because there is a Democratic wave coming, the size of which we don't know, so this looks like a pretty good year for Democrats, Madonna said. So we can already see that the poll director is biased, that he's expecting a huge Democratic wave. But we'll have to see if that actually turns out. And this poll is kind of based on the expectation of that wave. Wolf's struggles over budgets with the Republican-led General Assembly and his early support of higher income and sales taxes haven't hurt him. Madonna said, two of the Republican governor candidates, Wagner and Mango, have begun engaging in a bare-knuckled brawl, attacking each other in television commercials, a move that doesn't help either man. There's no major controversy that I can think of that hurts Wolf, Madonna said. People cite the budget imbroglios, but not a single state service was curtailed. There are no big negatives that voters seem to cite when we talk about Wolf and Casey. The two Democrats start off with other advantages. More voters viewed Wolf and Casey favorably than unfavorably, 50% favorable and 32% unfavorable for Wolf, and 43% and 25% for Casey. For Barletta, it was 14% favorable and 13% unfavorable, but his bigger problem remains that 69% of voters don't know enough about him to have an opinion. So between now and November, people will know more about him, I suppose. The poll did not ask how favorably voters view the Republican governor candidates, who are generally less well-known than Barletta. The poll also did not test for the other Republican senator candidates, Representative Jim Christiana of Beaver County and Joseph Bodvank of Allegheny County. More voters, 42%, also prefer Democratic congressional candidates to Republican candidates. 35% a question whose response often signal underlying voter sentiment. Another potential warning sign for Republicans, for the first time since 2009, more voters said that the state is headed in the right direction. 46% then said it was off the right track, 40%. So by 46 to 40, this poll says that voters in Pennsylvania think the state of Pennsylvania is headed in the right direction. Father emphasized the need for education in Korea, especially in Korea, educating people about communism, educating people about God's will and divine principle and about Father's theology, but especially about communism. And apparently that kind of situation needs to take place here in Pennsylvania as well, if this poll is accurate. And it may not be accurate, but I think we should perhaps assume that it is accurate and get to work on educating the people of Pennsylvania as to the evils of socialism, and especially socialism as espoused by the current governor. If the economy gets better, doesn't that help incumbents like Casey and Wolf? Madonna asked. A potential danger sign for Wolf and Casey, their job approval ratings. Fewer voters, 43%, said Wolf is doing a good or excellent job, than said he is doing a fair or poor job, 49%. Okay, so there is hope. For Casey, 37% of voters gave him an excellent or good rating compared to 43% of fair or poor. Okay, that gives hope. Madonna cautioned that voters' fair rating doesn't always break badly for a candidate. In fact, just before his 2012 re-election win, Casey's job approval was also stood at 37% excellent or good and 51% fair or poor. Madonna said these polls over time have shown job approval ratings below 50% often don't translate into election losses. Barletta might have another problem. State voters' favorable views of President Donald Trump declined since the last poll in September. Back then, 43% viewed Trump strongly or somewhat favorably, with 45% viewing him somewhat or strongly unfavorably. In the latest poll, Trump was down to 36% favorable and 60% unfavorable. But those numbers almost exactly matched the view of voters in October 2016, just before the president won Pennsylvania and the election. So this is a poll that has come out, and Governor Tom Wolf and Senator Casey will take comfort from that, but we'll have to hope that we can change that situation. We know about Scott Wagner, or we've heard about Scott Wagner in Mango. There's another person in the governor's race. This is Laura Ellsworth, a woman. She's also in the Republican primary and wants to run for governor as the Republican candidate. And I'd like to go through an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer a couple days ago about her. In GOP governor's race, Laura Ellsworth seeks to strike a different tone, it says. Let me get it back up to the beginning here. When Laura Ellsworth stepped to the microphone Wednesday at a press club luncheon here in Harrisburg, she said she hoped to talk about policies, economic development, and compromise in more detail than she could at recent Republican gubernatorial debates. In a race where her opponents, State Senator Scott Wagner and former health care consultant Paul Mango of Allegheny County, have drawn attention for their boisterous jabs at one another or at Democratic Governor Wolf, Ellsworth has consciously decided to strike a different tone. I don't believe in it, she said Wednesday, noting that she thinks voters want decency, candor, and honesty rather than 30-second attack ads. And Ellsworth thinks that's one reason she'd have the best shot at winning the November general election, though even she acknowledges some don't agree with that assessment. Recent polls have shown Ellsworth trailing the other candidates, but also suggest a large number of Republican voters are still undecided ahead of the May 15th primary. Ellsworth, an attorney who lives in Pittsburgh suburbs, said she believes Philadelphia, which came in 73rd out of 75 in one recent ranking of the economic health of major cities. You got that? Philadelphia came in 73rd out of 75 in one recent ranking of the economic health of major cities in America. That's bad. Anyway, Philadelphia has room to grow and develop. She cited Pittsburgh as an example of a city that transformed to become among the most livable, according to some rankings. Asked about criticism by advocates who argue that gentrification has kept that growth from benefiting people equally, Ellsworth said she believes in programs that encourage developers to create a range of housing options that could work for people of different income levels. She said she thinks that if a woman were elected governor, all of the Me Too stuff that is going on in Harrisburg will stop. Afterward, she explained that the state's sexual harassment policy should be reviewed and updated with one clear process for handling such allegations across state government. Currently, the process is varied. But Ellsworth also said Wednesday that she doesn't want being a woman to be the deciding factor when people are mulling whether to support her. Absolutely no one should vote for me because I'm a woman, any more than they should vote for those guys because they're guys, she said. All right, so that is Laura Ellsworth, who is also running for governor, along with Scott Wagner and Paul Mango. And those races will be decided on May 15th, just a month and a half now. A lot can happen between now and then. I'm looking for other stories here, but here is Philadelphia Inquirer has published a article about Wagner and Mango, but it's so one-sidedly tilted towards Wagner that I'm really not interested in going through it this morning. All right, let's see what's on Breitbart News this morning. The king has emphasized the importance of being involved in local politics. We'll wait for the Breitbart articles to come up. And so it's I've been talking about Pennsylvania politics because that is where the Chungung is located. And the politicians of Pennsylvania need to come into sync with the king so that they can connect the micro and the macro. Let's go through the lead article on Breitbart. Christians observe Good Friday around the world. Of course, not all around the world, because part of Christianity believes that next week is actually Easter, and that not tomorrow, but the 8th is Easter, and of course Good Friday is also this coming Friday, according to some people. But Breitbart follows the Roman tradition, and they say that Christians all over the world are observing Good Friday, commemorating the death of Jesus of Nazareth on a cross outside Israel's capital of Jerusalem. Christians believe this fulfilled centuries of prophecy of a deliverer who would pay the penalty for sin to reconcile mankind to God in a saga that would reach its climax on Easter Sunday. Many people know that Christians observe Good Friday as a holy occasion, but what precisely do Christians believe happened in the Middle East in AD 30? Well, it wasn't AD 30. I think people forget, they don't, or maybe they're just not aware that biblical scholars agree pretty much that Jesus was actually born between 4 BC and 6 BC. When the people created the calendar, they got it wrong, all right? They didn't actually pinpoint the correct date for Jesus' birth. So it wasn't AD 30. It was probably more like AD 24 to 26, something around there. Christmas, Good Friday, and Easter together formed the three seminal events that Christians believe are the focal point of history that will determine the destiny of humanity. While those words may seem jarring in a pluralistic and relativistic culture like modern America, for billions of devout Christians over the past 2,000 years, it has been the foundational belief of their lives. For tens of millions of Americans today, those central pillars of the Christian faith shape the entire focus of their time on earth. Which is why I think people, find it kind of disconcerting to discover that Jesus was not actually born on December 25th, and that Easter was kind of determined by the Council of Nicaea more than 300 years after his death, or about 300 years actually after his death. So these traditions started, in the 4th century, not in the 1st century. So, but true Father comes, and he's starting a tradition that actually begins with Christ, because he is the Christ. So the traditions that he established, we're not waiting 400 years, all right? We know exactly when Father was born. We know exactly when Father ascended. And we know exactly when of the days that he established as holy days. This is very important for the future, 2,000 people, for people 2,000 years from now. The Old Testament is full of references and prophecies to a Messiah, a Hebrew word that is translated Christ in Greek, who would deliver God's people. God promised Abraham that one of his descendants would bless all the nations on earth. His grandson Jacob, who changed his name to Israel and became the namesake of the Jewish state, declared that this deliverer would come through his own son, Judah. Judah's descendant, King David, recorded God's promise that this future leader would be one of his posterity. So it's a question of lineage, isn't it? So lineage of Abraham, lineage of Jacob or Israel, and lineage of Judah. It's about lineage. Old Testament prophets continued pronouncing their promises, of which Isaiah 53 is one of many examples. Therefore, the prophet Isaiah predicts a man of sorrows, one who would be pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities. According to Isaiah, it would be said of this person that his suffering brought us peace, and that he shall bear their iniquities, and that he bore the son of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. Of course, Isaiah also predicts a king of glory, Messiah. So there are two possibilities in prophecies, depending on whether human beings accomplish our portion of responsibility. Christians believe that Jesus fulfilled all those prophecies recounted in the 4 Gospels recorded in the New Testament. Then he has a long quotation from Mark, a very long quotation from Mark, basically a whole 15th chapter. Breitbart News will continue this series during the weekend into Easter Sunday, examining these millennia-old beliefs that continue to guide the lives and actions of so many people spanning the globe, including tens of millions of the faithful in the United States. Yes. Well, it's good that Breitbart is doing that. It's always, but it would be good, though, if we could focus on holy events and holy traditions, not only around the time of Christmas and Easter, but throughout the year. Parents say that Boko Haram, that's a Islamic terrorist group in Africa, will not release a girl because she refuses to denounce Christ. Boko Haram refused to release a 15-year-old Christian girl kidnapped this month, along with 110 other schoolgirls, because she rebuffed the terrorist organization's efforts to convert her to Islam, her parents revealed. Leah Sharibu is the only one of the abducted girls still held by the Boko Haram jihadists because she refused to convert to Islam, stressed USA Today. Nathan Shirabu, the girl's father, recently told the newspaper, "My daughter is alive, but they wouldn't release her because she is a Christian. They told her they would release her if she converted, but she said she will never become a Muslim. I am very sad, but I'm also overjoyed because my daughter did not denounce Christ." Echoing Mr. Sharibu, the girl's mother, Rebecca Sharibu, also indicated the jihadists are not releasing her daughter because she refuses to denounce her Christian faith. The mother told USA Today, "What her schoolmates told me was that my daughter was told she must recite the Kalima Shahada, the Islamic profession of faith, and she said she does not know how to recite it, and she was not brought up a Muslim. She had already boarded alongside others who were ready to come home. They said, "My daughter would only be brought back home the day she knows how to recite Kalima Shahada." On February 19th, Boko Haram terrorists kidnapped 110 girls when they stormed the government Girls Science and Technical College in Adapchi, Nigeria. The jihadist organization freed 104 of the girls last week. Referring to the freed abductees, USA Today notes they were dropped off in the middle of the night under an agreement with the government that included withdrawing Nigerian soldiers, but 5 girls had died during the assault, the released schoolgirls said. Only 15-year-old Leah remains in the hands of the brutal terrorist group known for kidnapping Christian girls and forcing them to convert to Islam, many times by threatening with rape and following through. Nigerian President Muhammad Buhari's administration reportedly claims it did not pay the terrorist ransom for the girl, adding that security forces obtained the release through back-channel efforts after a pause in operations and with the help of some friends of the country. Critics have blasted the Nigerian president for kidnapping, which came a few years after Boko Haram abducted nearly 300 girls from Nigeria's Chibok in April 2014. Olupade Agoro, the chairman of the opposition party, threatened to take the Nigerian leader to the International Criminal Court in The Hague if the government does not secure Leah's release. He said the government's negotiations favored Muslims, and Leah was the only Christian student abducted, and notes USA Today. The Nigerian leader has repeatedly claimed that his administration defeated Boko Haram just to have the group carry out attacks after the allegations. Leah Sharibu will not be abandoned, President Buhari proclaimed. The terrorist group's name, Boko Haram, loosely translates as Western education is forbidden. That's a loose translation of Boko Haram. Western education is forbidden. Persecution against Christians around the world. There's an article down here that says that Christians are the most persecuted group in this century. Let's see who this gentleman is who's saying that. Father Jonathan Morris is making this claim. Longtime Fox News contributor Father Jonathan Morris said that Christian persecution is not only holding strong, but is growing throughout the world, in a Good Friday conversation with Alex Marlowe on Breitbart Radio. Christians are the most persecuted group in the world, Father Morris told the Breitbart News editor-in-chief, whether in the more overt forms in the Middle East, China, and elsewhere, or in the less obvious silent persecution that takes place in Western countries. This silent persecution takes many forms, the priest continued, sometimes fueled by government programs, and other times as a form of cultural persecution through ridicule of Christian beliefs and the message that Christians have no place in modern society. Well, that's taking place in America, isn't it? That ridicule of Christian beliefs. The vice president has been ridiculed for his Christian beliefs. People who say that they have talked to Jesus or talked to God are ridiculed by atheists and people who consider that kind of a thing to be a kind of a mental illness or derangement. As an example, Father Morris cited last year's Democratic National Committee meeting where Director Tom Perez said that in the modern Democratic Party there is no room for pro-life candidates or politicians. If that is not persecution, I don't know what is, Father Morris said. It is the most narrow-minded and despicable position imaginable, and one that would have been unthinkable even 20 or 30 years ago. To say that anyone who believes that the life of an unborn child deserves respect and protection cannot take part in the Democratic Party is a clear form of persecution, he said. Father Morris also told Alex Marlowe that he believes that Christians need to do a better job explaining their beliefs to society at large, following St. Peter's counsel to always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you the reason for the hope that is in you. But do this with gentleness and respect. Many opportunities are lost because Christians fail to do better, to be better witnesses to the compelling message of the gospel, he suggested. Asked about the recent controversy over an alleged denial of the existence of hell by Pope Francis, Father Morris said, "I don't know exactly what happened, and that's another point, because we should know what happened. because they shouldn't allow the Pope to do these interviews without having some sort of recording device or with a journalist who at least takes notes. The bad news from this is, if you were hoping there was no consequences to sin, you are mistaken, Father Morris said, because hell does exist. No priest, no pastor, no pope, no journalist can change that, he observed. It is in the Bible. Jesus said it in his own words. By the same token, the good news hasn't changed either, he continued. Christ has conquered death, conquered sin, and that is what we celebrate on Good Friday. All right? He mentions Paul here, and I went to see the movie Paul, the Apostle of Christ, with my wife a week ago. And as I mentioned to Greg on Wednesday, it's a real promotion of a beta-type Christianity, of beta Christianity. And I think this is the thing that is going to catch on with the king. And I think this is the reason that people are coming to interview him from Argentina, from various media outlets, even on the West Coast and of America and other places, because he is advocating what our father advocated, the establishment of a kingdom, the establishment of a nation, the establishment of a physical kingdom of God on earth. This is, of course, this is in the family pledge, right? The kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven on earth, as well as in heaven. Not just in heaven, but also on earth. And ostensibly, this has been a part of Christian belief since the beginning, because we pray the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But state-run Christianity, never wanting to challenge the governments of the satanic world, and always being, faithful to the words in Romans 13, does not want to say that the governments of this world are illegitimate. Don't want to say that. Hey, whoa. But they have legitimacy in the sense that God lets them perform certain functions in his providence. But God's purpose is to establish his kingdom on this earth. His kingdom on this earth, physical kingdom, with lines on a map. Eventually encompassing the entire planet and anywhere else where human beings may live outside of this earth. And that is the thing that journalists are beginning to catch on to, that this idea of a kingdom on earth, of a nation on earth, of a physical nation, is actually real, is actually serious. And I think that was the fundamental change that took place as a result of the Book of Life registration blessing on February 28th. That people, on the left especially, interestingly, have begun to realize that this is what is going on. And they want to find out more. And when they find out more, I expect that persecution against us will increase as we grow and as more and more people begin to take us seriously. Then more and more opposition will surface, and we will have to deal with that. Elsewhere, on Breitbart News, Democratic Representative Etsy waited 3 months to dismiss staffer accused of threats and abuse. ESPN's Jamil Hill attempts to make a Laura Ingraham boycott racial. Of course, the boycott against Laura Ingraham is going ahead, continuing because of her remarks against David Hogg, who is the hero of the left, resulting from the February 14th massacre in Florida. We're not consumers, we're the products. Free our internet's Christy Lee McNally on Google and Facebook. Concha David Hogg's attempt to end Laura Ingram's career sets a dangerous precedent. This is actually an example of demagoguery, and it is a very dangerous precedent, although it follows on previous precedents in the 1930s in Europe and other places. As more and more companies pull their advertisements from Fox News program The Ingram Angle in protest of a controversial tweet from the show's host Laura Ingram, the Hill's media reporter and opinion contributor Joe Concha writes that if the boycott succeeds, we've entered some dangerous territory. Excuse me here a minute. This thing begins to hurt after a while. For Laura Ingram, there was no choice but to apologize to Parkland School shooting activist David Hogg for her foolish tweet regarding the 17-year-old being rejected by several colleges. On reflection, well, let's go to the actual Hill article. This is an important point that David Hogg is doing something that has been done very often in the past, and this is how dictatorships come into power, by the way. On reflection, in the spirit of Holy Week, I apologize for any upset or hurt my tweet caused him or any of the brave victims of Parkland, Ingram wrote on Twitter. For the record, I believe my show was the first to feature David immediately after that horrific shooting, and even noted how poised he was given the tragedy. As always, he's welcome to return to the show anytime for a productive discussion. I don't think that's going to happen. Ingram had obviously seen this story played out before, almost 1 year ago, via her friend and former co-worker Bill O'Reilly, a cable news icon who eventually saw too many advertisers flee his program, forcing the network to dispose of the popular primetime figure who had been with it for decades as the industry's top-rated host. You know the drill. Once one advertiser goes, it's certain another will follow, given recent history, and another, and another. Because once that snowball gets going, there's no telling where or when it will stop, in the fear of a brand being permanently damaged. We're now at 7 in the Ingram front as of Friday morning, despite her apology on Thursday afternoon. Ingram, and perhaps those above her on the Fox News food chain, saw the all-too-familiar scenario playing out again after Hogg's boycott call gained momentum in the media and especially on social media. And given all the changes at the network in the past 15 months, the ousters of O'Reilly and Eric Bolling, amid sexual misconduct allegations, the departure of Megyn Kelly to NBC, the passing of Roger Ailes, the resignation of his successor, Bill Shine, and all of the programming changes that have resulted, the last thing Fox wanted was to lose another host after stabilizing its lineup, maintaining its ratings dominance, and putting new management in place at the top. So how did we get here? A review of the past 48 hours shows Hogg tweeting out a note around him being rejected from 4 schools, including UCLA. Ingram, by the way, has UCLA accepted him? Someone needs to check that. I'll bet probably all 4 schools have now turned around and have accepted him, but I have seen no confirmation of that. Ingram unwisely jumped on board from there to jab Hogg and included an original Daily Wire story on the topic. David Hogg rejected by 4 colleges to which he applied and whines about it. She wrote to 2.17 million followers. Hogg responded by listing 12 prominent advertisers of the Ingram angle and calling on a boycott. He proceeded to expand the list to 100 by sharing a list by Media Matters, which has ample experience in this arena from targeting Fox News hosts before. Notably, Hogg chose to accelerate his boycott effort after Ingram's apology. Hogg expanded the reason for the Ingram boycott beyond her tweet around his college rejections late Thursday night by retweeting a David Cause story recounting the host's more provocative and controversial comments over her career. So what is this boycott about exactly? Ingram immaturely mocking a public figure in the form of Hogg around some schools that rejected him? Or is it about Ingram's career as a conservative talk radio and television opinion host overall? Either way, we've entered some dangerous territory here if boycotts like this one succeed. And not many are speaking out against said danger for 2 reasons. 1, fear of reprisal for criticizing Hogg, who has the benefit of being protected from any criticism while being free to level it. 2, fear of being seen as, quote, the person attacking a mass school shooting survivor, regardless of whether there's a basis for such criticism or not. When Hogg first appeared on television shortly after that horrific day at his high school on February 14th, he couldn't look more impressive in terms of his composure, intelligence, and ability to report in an articulate, measured way that some adults in the business have yet to master. Ludicrous claims of him being a child actor or being coached soon followed and have thankfully been dismissed by those not living in a world of conspiracy theories or blinded by pure partisanship. Know this, he may be 17, but should be treated like an adult after entering the arena and becoming a prominent voice in what has become the biggest story of the year thus far. But things have gone sideways since. Hogg has played loose with more than a few facts and has leveled the same kind of personal attacks on which he's basing his boycott. And through it all, almost all anchors and reporters have allowed him to go unchallenged out of that same fear of being seen as a monster for going after the kid with the just cause. There are exceptions to those not willing to challenge Hogg, starting first and foremost with conservative writer, commentator, and podcast radio host Ben Shapiro. I look forward to Hogg's apologies to Republicans, Dana Lash, and Marco Rubio. He said Rubio was bribed by the NRA to give away children's lives. Shapiro wrote in the online publication he founded, the Daily Wire, "You may not like what Ingram said, you may disagree with it, I did, but it isn't remotely close to the level of viciousness with which Hogg has attacked people who disagree with him," Shapiro added. And Shapiro is correct, as in Parkland's student Kyle Kashuf. The media took interest in Hogg to push an agenda, Kashuf, a pro-Second Amendment student, wrote in a series of tweets aimed at Hogg. They've propped people up and have turned them into shields. I am not doubting anyone's sincerity, but people have certainly been hiding behind my classmates to push an agenda. Yes. Hogg has rejected Ingram's apology and says he will only accept such an overture if she denounces what he described as the network's attempt to mudsling at children. And therein lies the rub. As stated, Hogg should be treated as an adult. It's the arena he chose to enter and had every right to do so, given his abilities and what he experienced. But if a boycott succeeds here, it sets the kind of precedent that will forever change what the First Amendment is supposed to stand for. Ingram wrote an ill-advised tweet that had zero upside. She's apologized since. Hogg won't accept and will continue to push back via social media and Friday morning CNN interview, an effort that won't end until Ingram vanishes from the airwaves. If someone is offended by her program or her as a person, don't watch or listen, and allow the free market eventually to decide if she's worth keeping on. But the effort to silence a voice, to essentially end a career based on something like this, sets not only a dangerous but completely un-American precedent. Un-American, undemocratic, by the way, and goes against the First Amendment. First Amendment, of course, being a God-given right. So it goes against that God-given right to express one's opinions. Even stupid opinions deserve to be expressed, have a right to be expressed. But the free market will decide. But this is the kind of thing that the left has, and Hill, of course, did not mention this, George Soros here, but he's also involved in this. He's involved in this. And the many organizations that he funds are supporting Hogg and are propping him up. They're the ones that are propping him up and using him as a shield, as that pro-Second Amendment student observed. Donnie Deutsch on the Ingram situation. We can't have animals attacking children, he says. So that's a part of the situation. Also on Breitbart, on Friday's broadcast of MSNBC's Morning Joe, author, branding, and marketing expert and radio host Donnie Deutsch weighed in on the controversy over Fox News host Laura Ingram's comments on Parkland survivor David Hogg by stating, "We can't have animals on the air attacking children." Co-host Joe Scarborough began the discussion by stating that a 4.1 GPA isn't something worthy of mockery, and he doesn't understand why people would attack high school students for why they think that would work politically. Deutsch responded that Ingram's comments lacked basic human empathy or sympathy. He added Laura Ingram told LeBron James to shut up and dribble. And Laura Ingraham needs to just shut up and dribble also. She's a reprehensible human being. And the good news here is the advertisers will speak and they will continue. You might see Laura Ingraham saying bye-bye. Scarborough then said that people make mistakes, and Ingraham apologized sincerely. Deutsch responded that while we all make mistakes, when it is a serial behavior, and the apology was only for one reason, because she was losing advertisers and her behavior stands for itself. And we can all argue about politics, but there's just human decency. We can't have animals on the air attacking children. There are just core values. Well, so this guy is part of the group or the effort, that the force that is propping up this kid, David Hogg. And he's a kid. He is a kid. He has entered an adult arena, but he is a child. And he's using the fact that he is a child, right, to his advantage, in much the same way as some women use their sexuality to beat on men. He's using his childhood or his childness to beat on his opponents, people that he wants to oppose, people that he wants to criticize. And he attacks people viciously, but any mockery against him is not allowed. Not allowed. But here, a student launches a pro-life walkout, he wants to test, he says, whether there is, in fact, a fair and balanced situation here, or maybe there's a double standard. Let's see who this is. A Sacramento, California high school junior's plan for a national student walkout on April 11th is inspired by his pro-life values and his strong conviction that all students have First Amendment rights to stand up for their principles. Brandon Gillespie here tweets March 22nd, I have officially announced the pro-life walkout that I am organizing. It is going to take place on Wednesday, April 11th at 10 a.m. The walkout will last for 17 minutes. We encourage students across the country to participate in a stand for #life. In an interview with Breitbart News, Brandon Gillespie, a student at Rockland High School, said he met with his principal last Friday to discuss his plan for a pro-life student walkout to protest abortion. I asked him for the exact same accommodations that were given to students who held the previous walkout on March 14th, and he was not able to give me a direct answer on whether or not I was able to have this pro-life walkout, Gillespie said. He told me he has to go talk to certain administrators and people in the school district before he can give me a direct answer. So he told me he will get back to me on April 2nd. Gillespie notes, however, that while currently he cannot be certain his school will allow the pro-life walkout, he does know the walkout is already slated to occur in schools throughout the country as a result of his social media campaign. Initially, I just started through social media using a #life, he explained, and the word has just spread. Just through social media, pretty much, through different media outlets and stuff, and just me going and doing interviews with people. People have been reaching out to me and saying, I love your cause, and I love what you're doing. I'm going to do this at my school. And Gillespie said his hope is to engage as many people as possible in the pro-life movement. Students participating in the pro-life walkout on April 11th will walk out of their school at 10 a.m. in all time zones for 17 minutes. As did students who participated in the gun control walkout on March 14th. Asked if he is primarily organizing the walkout because he is pro-life or because he is challenging a potential double standard in public schools that allowed a student walkout during instructional time over promotion of a progressive issue such as gun control, Gillespie responded, it's a little bit of both. So yes, I'm very pro-life. I'm against abortion, he continued. So that's the biggest thing. But also, I really want to test and see if there's a double standard at schools because the previous walkout on March 14th was school sanctioned and it was for gun control. So I want to test the schools and see if they would allow a more conservative topic. That's why I'm doing this. But yes, I'm also very pro-life. Gillespie said his history teacher, Julaine Benzel, was the main inspiration for his idea to launch the pro-life walkout. Is she going to be teaching him at that particular time? I don't know. She's the one who motivated me to do this because she questioned the school about whether it would give the same courtesy to a group of students that wanted to protest something else, for example, abortion, he explained. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm testing to see if the school district will give the same courtesy. She's really who inspired me to do this. Benzel was placed on paid leave last week for questioning whether students against abortion would be permitted to walk out of class in the same way thousands of students walked out of class during instruction time on March 14th to promote gun control. Complaints were made against Benzel by some parents and students who said her questions to her students were anti-abortion, resulting in the teacher being placed on leave. Whoa. If schools are going to allow one group of students to get up during class and walk out to protest one issue, would they still give the same courtesy to another group of students who wanted to get up and walk out to protest, she asked, according to Fox News Insider. And I used the example of abortion. Gillespie, who plans to enter the military after he completes high school, said he totally understands the criticism that no students should be permitted to engage in walkouts for political causes during instructional time. But another big part of this is for students' rights, he told Breitbart News. I don't think students understand that they still have their First Amendment rights, even when they are in school. Just because they're in school doesn't mean their rights are taken away. I want students to know across the country that they still have the right to stand up for what they believe in, even if it's conflicting with what the school district believes. Connecticut-based constitutional and education attorney Deborah Stevenson told Breitbart News the constitutional principles of equal protection under the law may apply in the case of the pro-life walkout. If one group was allowed to have a school walkout to advocate for school safety through gun control, then other groups may have a right to have a walkout to advocate for pro-life causes under the premise of equal protection principles, she said. This might be particularly true when both the groups are advocating for the protection of the lives of individuals. Ah, yes. Protect children not just in school, but also in the womb. Yeah, there you go. Stevenson notes, however, that the use of taxpayer funds under existing law in many states may preclude the kind of partisan political advocacy seen most recently by use of these walkouts. However, if one side of an argument is allowed to effectuate the kind of demonstration, then it would appear to be fair to allow those who have an opposing view to do the same, she added. It would be wise, then, for all who seek to advocate using school district funds or services to determine their liability under the law before proceeding. In other words, you could get your pantsuit off of you. Though Gillespie said he believes, in general, students should not be out protesting for political causes during instructional time, he cannot dismiss the fact that schools allowed the gun control walkout. So then just basically repeating the first point. Students for Life of America, SFLA. Okay. All right. Very good. Very good young man. And it's great to see these young people coming up like this and speaking out publicly about their political positions. It's good to have debate. It's good to have debate, you know. But of course, one side wants to shut down that debate, wants to just not allow the debate to take place, to criticize and castigate, and end the careers of anyone who disagrees with them. That is not productive. And here, as advertisers abandon Laura Ingraham, her fans are sticking with her. They have a hashtag I Stand With Laura. Let's see how that is working out. Amid the controversy and advertiser fallout surrounding Fox News' Laura Ingraham, fans of the conservative host have called for a boycott of the businesses who have pulled their ads from her show. About a dozen companies have decided to stop running ads on Ingram's show since she engaged Parkland student and all that. Business such as Office Depot, Jenny Craig, Hulu, TripAdvisor, Expedia, Wayfair, Stitch Fix, Nestle, Johnson & Johnson, Atlantis Paradise Island, and Liberty Mutual have all announced they will pull their ads. The controversy began on Wednesday, and we all know about that, okay? And we know as more advertisers announced they will no longer advertise on the Ingram show, fans of the conservative host took to Twitter to say they were pulling their business from Ingram's former sponsors, launching the hashtag I Stand With Laura. According to CBS, the Ingram Angle, which airs daily at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, was the number 4 cable show on TV last month, according to Adweek, both in terms of total viewers and viewers in the 25 to 54 demographic, a coveted age group for cable news advertisers. According to Ad Age, it's on track to be the second most viewed show in its time slot, in which it competes with MSNBC's The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Fox News, which has not offered a statement, has faced a number of ad boycotts in recent years after Sean Hannity supported Alabama Judge Roy Moore in his campaign for U.S. Senate. 5 companies removed their ads, including Keurig. Hannity fans then launched a boycott of Keurig, posting videos of themselves destroying their coffee makers on social media. This company's CEO later apologized, and former host Bill O'Reilly lost dozens of advertisers for his show after the New York Times reported that he and Fox News had agreed to a series of secret settlements over harassment allegations. To date, roughly a dozen advertisers have pulled their ads from Ingram's show. However, according to CBS's Money Watch, 129 companies have run ads during her show over the last 10 days, making it quite possible that Ingram could still survive the boycott effort. Yeah. Laura Ingram, what happens to her? And I'm not really a fan of hers, but what happens to her could be an indication of where America is heading and how fast it's heading in that direction. And Laura Ingram is not the only person, because now Hogg is attacking McCain. Now I want to join him. But he's attacking McCain. David Hogg goes after John McCain. Why do you take so much money from the NRA? Student and gun control activist David Hogg has now turned his sights on one of the most high-profile U.S. senators in Congress, Senator John McCain. The 17-year-old tweeted Friday to McCain, who is in Arizona, recovering from brain cancer treatment, "Why do you take so much money from the NRA?" Wait, so you cannot attack a child, but it's okay to attack someone who is recovering from brain cancer surgery? I don't know how that works. McCain has not responded to Hogg's tweet. The Arizona senator and chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee is the top recipient of donations from the National Rifle Association, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. According to the center, McCain has received $7.7 million from the NRA. Hogg's tweet comes after he called for his Twitter followers to pressure advertisers to pull their ads from Fox News show host Laura Ingram's broadcast after she said he was whining about college rejections. And then again, the whole thing about that. McCain, 81, is a 6-term senator, Vietnam War veteran, and former prisoner of war. He was one of 4 Republicans who supported a bipartisan bill on gun purchase background checks in 2013, which did not ultimately clear the Senate. Yeah. So David Hogg is basically using a very blunt instrument and just going after anyone in sight. And he's I think, becoming a little bit, more than a little bit, intoxicated with his power. Well, let's see what happens to him. Okay, let's take a break, and we'll come back with our final segment after this.
boy, wasn't that fun shooting this Tommy gun today?
It's always fun shooting Tommy guns. This one especially. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
All polished and chromed up. It really looks like $1 million.
Yeah. Elliot Ness would have loved one of those.
Yeah, and it's available right now in your favorite dealer, and you go pick one up.
Yeah, just have him call your distributor.
I mean, the gun, you know, was initially made way back when, back in the 27 is this one.
Yeah, Model 27.
I was surprised by how quick it knocked down those plates.
Oh, 3.5 second run, under 3.5 second run, knocking down a plate right. 341.
I mean, the gun is heavy. It's about what, 12, 14 pounds, especially with this drum. But it's surprising how quick you can go with it. It would actually make quite a good self-defense rifle at home.
If I climbed in somebody's window and they were aiming that at me, I think I'd get out of there real quick. So
that sounds about right to me.
Just the intimidation factor alone.
Fire!
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, March 31st, 2018. Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Hyung Jin-moon. We have, speaking of children entering the adult arena, we have a 13-year-old running for governor in Vermont, and he is running on a platform for tougher gun control, tighter gun control laws. In Montpelier, Vermont, an unlikely candidate for Vermont governor says he would sign legislation to tighten the state's gun control laws if he held the top office. Ethan Sonnenborn, 13, of Bristol, is running as a Democrat in 2018. He said he took part in his school's walkout earlier this month against gun violence. My generation has been taking an important step in this because we're the ones getting shot. This affects us directly, and people who say it can't happen in Vermont. We came this close to it happening in Vermont. It will happen in Vermont if we don't take action. He referred to a thwarted school shooting plot discovered last month at Fairhaven Union High School. The current legislation being debated in Montpelier would raise the minimum age to buy a gun from 18 to 21, limit the capacity of gun magazines, strengthen background checks and ban bump stocks. Sonnenborn was one of about 2,500 people who participated in the March for Our Lives in Montpelier. He said he would like to see an assault weapons ban added to Vermont's current bill. Republican Governor Phil Scott is against that measure. Sonnenborn is currently gaining legislative experience as a state house page. Lawyers hope to compromise on the bill and send it to the governor by the end of this week. Scott said he's considering signing it, depending on what's included in the final draft. Sonnenborn said he doesn't own guns, but that some friends do, and he understands the cultural importance of hunting plays in the state. He doesn't agree with lawmakers who voted against the Senate bill and emphasized that they come from parts of the state where guns are more prevalent. The bill is good building block, but it doesn't have the kind of progressive gun reform Vermont needs, Sonnenborn said. The Vermont Constitution has no minimum age requirement to become governor. Sonnenborn will face a Democratic primary against James Ehlers and Christine Hallquist. His focus is on the economy, education, and health care. Sonnenborn's campaign motto is, "Because Tomorrow Matters." 13-year-old running for governor of Vermont, and wants to ban assault weapons and have a stricter control for other things as well, raising the minimum age, for example. A Roseanne revival stirs debate among comedians. Silverman, Nanjiani Eichner. Let's see what they're debating about, if we can get to it. Sarah Silverman's praise for this week's premiere of Roseanne ignited a spirited debate Thursday. about art, artists, and politics with her own comedic colleagues, including Kumail Nanjiani and Billy Eichner. The debate was civilized and enlightened, especially in the take no prisoners world of social media argument. Roseanne, which attracted a whopping 18.2 million viewers in its return to ABC after a 21-year absence, is becoming a political lightning rod because of star Roseanne Barr's support for President Trump and controversial tweets and comments. Silverman, host of Hulu's I Love You, America, started things off by tweeting she loved Roseanne's premiere, that familiar feeling of the old but within comedy and content so totally of this moment, like the angst with close families over politics. She then appeared to make a larger comment about the art and politics. Hope you all let go of needing art too to reflect, express only what you feel yourself. That's not what art's for. Okay. So a bunch of comedians arguing on Twitter. Let's see if there's any change in the late night talk shows. Okay. Let's look at this fiery crash that is supposed to happen, I guess tomorrow, is when the Chinese space station is supposed to come down. And Michigan is all upset about it. Michigan has put their emergency operations into effect. But this could be dangerous for some people who are in the vicinity of wherever it does fall, not only by getting hit directly, but also there could be nuclear or other material in there that could cause damage to human health. This is in the Detroit Free Press, and these papers that ally with the USA Today, they have a very irritating websites. If you eliminate the ad, it goes back to the front page and won't let you read the article. All right, anyway, so let's see where we can. The Sun UK. Okay, let's see. Here we go. So let's not do the Detroit Free Press, but let's do the Sun from UK. 10 hats at the ready. Out of control 9-ton Chinese space station Tiangong-1 due to crash into Earth on Easter Sunday, and experts still don't know where it will hit. Experts say the spacecraft, said to be the size of a school bus, will hit into the Earth's atmosphere at 11:33 a.m. British Standard Time. So that would be about, I think we're 5 hours right now, so 6:33 a.m. Sunday on in the Cheongguk time. The out-of-control Chinese space station is set to hit Earth on Easter Sunday. Estimates say the Tiangong-1 spacecraft will enter Earth's atmosphere on Sunday at 11:33 BST and could unleash a series of fireballs watched by observers. Okay. Experts are still not sure where the satellite fragments are likely to land, but areas that could be hit include New York, Barcelona, and Rome. The 34 by 11-foot spacecraft, about the size of a school bus, was launched back in 2011, but has since lost connection with China's space agency and is now falling out of orbit. Despite the consensus from experts around the world, China hasn't actually admitted that the spacecraft descent is uncontrolled. The spacecraft's descent is currently being tracked by Aerospace Engineering and the European Space Agency, and say it is currently dropping out of orbit by about 2.5 miles a day. Zhu Gongpeng from China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporate said, "We have been continuously monitoring Tiangong-1 and expect to allow it to fall within the first half of this year. It will burn up on entering the atmosphere, and the remaining wreckage will fall into a designated area of the sea without endangering the surface. The odds of being struck by a space debris are 1 in 1.2 trillion. Tiangong, which means heavenly palace in Chinese, is carrying a highly toxic chemical called hydrazine." It's called heavenly palace. That's Tiangong. So you know what the Chinese characters are? It's Chen Kung. That's what the characters are. Tian is the word for heaven. Yeah, heaven. And in the Korean pronunciation, that is a chun. And palace, of course, is in Korean is kung. So this is a chun kung. Their heavenly palace is falling to earth. It's falling to earth. Wow, it's breaking up. It's going to burn up. Oh. The material is used as rocket fuel, but exposure to humans is believed to cause symptoms like nausea and seizures, with long-term contact said to cause cancer. The good news is that it's very unlikely that anyone will actually get hit by the spacecraft, which is expected to break up into debris upon re-entry. A statement from the non-profit Aerospace Corporation on Easter morning, at least in the Western tradition. The heavenly palace is falling. We could go someplace with that, but we'll not. I'll move on. Boy, that's tempting, though. We'll move on, though. When considering the worst-case location, the probability that a specific person will be struck by Tiangong-1 debris is about 1 million times smaller than the odds of winning the Powerball jackpot. In the history of spaceflight, no one person has ever been harmed by re-entering space debris. Only one person has ever been recorded as being hit by a piece of space debris, and fortunately, she was not injured. All right. Got hit by it, but weren't injured. The ESA's Holger Krag told Newsweek, owing to the geometry of the station's orbit, we can already exclude the possibility that any fragments will fall over any spot further north than 43 degrees north or further south than 43 degrees south. Well, guess what? We're at about 41 degrees here, just to let you know. So we're technically in the area. This means that re-entry may take place over any spot on Earth between these latitudes, which includes several European countries. For example, the date, time, and geographic footprint of the re-entry can only be predicted with large uncertainties. Even shortly before re-entry, only a very large time and geographical window can be estimated. Yeah, we're at the 41st parallel. So anyway, FYI. Okay, we have time for one more story. Let's see. So we do. Okay, Drudge is refreshing here. Let's look at Arnold Schwarzenegger's heart surgery. He's back, though, I understand. TMZ. Anyway, he's back. He's back, as he promised. The NCAA, this lady, Sister Jean, I wonder if she agrees with the Pope that there is no hell. Of Loyola, Sister Jean of Loyola, Chicago. Well, she's gotten her team, I guess, to the Final Four, right? I haven't been watching, but is that the case? Are they in the Final Four now? Her role as the face of Loyola Chicago NCAA tournament. A grin crept across Mark Frado's face as he lowered it toward the microphone Friday morning. Sister Jean, the former St. John's Sports Information Director and current boxing ring announcer, said, is in the building. Moments later, a crew of Alamo Dome workers looked like the Army Corps of Engineers as they took less than a minute to assemble a wheelchair ramp leading to the dais. And then, amid a cacophony of firing flash bulbs and video camera operators fighting one another for position, the biggest celebrity of the NCAA tournament rolled in. Unless you've been in a coma for the past 2 weeks, you know Sister Jean Dolores Schmidt. She's the 98-year-old nun who serves as the chaplain for Loyola Chicago's basketball team and sends each player a personalized scouting report before each game. She's also a former college administrator who helped shepherd Mundelein College through the tumultuous early 1970s. In an oral history she gave in 1998 about her years at Mundelein that now resides in the Women in Leadership Archives at Loyola Chicago, she said her mother always said it was better to wear out than to rust out. On Good Friday, a day before her Ramblers faced Michigan in the national semifinals, Sister Jean seemed to in no danger of wearing out. She's the inspiration for one of the fastest-selling bobbleheads in bobblehead history. Her face adorns T-shirts and socks across the country, and she's just as amazed about all of this as everyone else is. I never imagined 2 or 3 cameras, let alone this large group, Sister Jean said Friday. Everything just seemed to mushroom, and I could never tell you how that happens. It's just like when students visit universities before they're admitted. When they're in high school, I always tell them that something magical happens. You don't know what it is, but you know you belong there. And so if I got nervous when all of this was happening, I said to myself, well, I tell other people it's magical, and so just go and do it. And it's a big thrill for me to be here this morning with all of you. And you know what? I'm not a bit nervous. How much juice does Sister Jean have at the Final Four? She's the only person here who could go on camera without first pouring her beverage of choice in an NCAA-approved Powerade cup. But perhaps the rules are different for holy water. Sister Jean has embraced her moment since the cameras found her following Loyola Chicago forward Dante Ingram's buzzer beater that took down Miami and Dallas on March 15th. On that day when she wasn't surrounded by security, every second she spent in the arena, she even talked a little trash about the Ramblers' next opponent. Well, as much trash as a nun can talk. Be careful, Tennessee, she said. And she was correct. Tennessee should have been more careful, especially when it came to guarding Clayton Custer, who hit a late shot to sink the number 3 seed Volunteers. All right, so anyway, I'm not following NCAA this year. Have in past years, but, kind of busy this year, so I haven't been able to do that. All right, and also we don't have a television in our house. That, by the way, is a very liberating thing I've found. When you have kids in the house, of course, it's almost impossible not to have a television. But when the kids go, it's possible not to have a television. And it's very liberating, I found. Of course, you don't get to watch the NCAA, but there are drawbacks. But I could probably watch it on Hulu or something like that, pay some money for that. But then you get to decide, do I want to pay money for this? You know, it's not just on, you just turn it on, but you have to decide, do I want to pay money for this? And I don't, at least not this year. Anyway, that's the whole thing about television. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's time to end this broadcast with that note about television and the liberation of not having television in the house. I wish you a good weekend. The thing I like about this area in Northeast Pennsylvania, people don't just say Merry Christmas. They say, have a nice Easter or Happy Easter. 3 people said that to me yesterday. That was just amazing. It's so wonderful to live in an area where the Christian tradition is this strong. So have a nice Easter, all right? Even though it's only the West. And if you're in Russia or in other places, have a nice Easter next week. God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.